Søren Kierkegaard's leap of faith. Believe absurd things to be truly human. You're standing on the edge of a cliff. There's nothing beneath you but fog. No proof there's a bridge. No map, no logic to guide you. But someone tells you, jump anyway. That's faith, at least, according to Søren Kierkegaard, the 19th century Danish philosopher who believed that being human requires believing the absurd, not because it's comforting, but because it's the only way to be truly free. Kierkegaard lived in a time when religion had become routine, sermons were polite, God was just background noise in Christian Denmark. But he thought real faith wasn't safe or respectable. It was existential terror. He wrote about the biblical story of Abraham, the father of faith. God commands him to sacrifice his son Isaac. Abraham doesn't argue, doesn't explain. He walks up the mountain with a knife. For Kierkegaard, this wasn't blind obedience. It was the ultimate paradox. Abraham believes in God's goodness, even as God demands something evil. He suspends morality. He accepts contradiction. And still, he believes. That's the leap of faith. It's not based on evidence. In fact, it defies reason. You believe not because it makes sense, but because it doesn't. And that, Kierkegaard argued, is what separates authentic existence from cowardice. Most people avoid the leap. They live in what he called the aesthetic stage, chasing pleasure, avoiding commitment, drowning in distraction. Or they enter the ethical stage, trying to live a good life by reason and responsibility. But neither is enough. Eventually, reason fails. Ethics crack. You're left with anxiety, despair, what Kierkegaard called the sickness unto death. And in that moment you face the final choice, fall into nihilism, or leap, not toward certainty, not toward answers, but toward something beyond understanding, something infinite. Kierkegaard wasn't just talking about God. He was talking about love, devotion, meaning all the things that make life human and terrifying. Because to be truly human is to risk everything on something you can't prove. So here's the question he leaves you with. When logic runs out and there's only the abyss, will you freeze at the edge, or will you jump without knowing where you'll land? Cannibal Lifeboat, When Survival Destroys Morality. The year is 1884. A yacht called the Mignonette sinks in the South Atlantic. 4 men escape in a lifeboat. Weeks pass. No rescue, no food, no water. Then one of them, a 17-year-old cabin boy named Richard Parker, falls unconscious from drinking seawater. The other 3 talk, then act. They kill him, eat him, and live. When they're rescued, they tell the truth. They didn't kill out of rage or hatred. They killed to survive. The British court disagreed. The 2 survivors were convicted of murder. Because necessity, the judge said, is no justification for killing the innocent. But here's the question that still haunts moral philosophy. Is survival more important than morality? And if so, what is morality for? This is the Cannibal Lifeboat dilemma, a real case and a brutal thought experiment. It forces us to confront the boundary between what is right and what keeps you alive. And the boundary is thin. We'd like to believe that morality is firm, that even in disaster we hold the line. But history tells a different story. In 1972, a plane carrying a Uruguayan rugby team crashed in the Andes. The survivors lasted 72 days. They ate the dead, not out of malice, out of hunger. When rescued, they were forgiven, even praised for their honesty. But why is that cannibalism understood, while the Mignonette killing was condemned? Because one involved waiting for death, and the other involved choosing who dies. That's the razor edge. Killing to eat the dead may be tragedy. Killing to create a corpse, that's murder. But if the logic is the same, stay alive. Why does one feel forgivable and the other monstrous? Because deep down, we don't want morality to break, but we know it will. In war, in hunger, in collapse. People do things they never thought possible. Morality feels solid and comfort. But in the lifeboat, it's paper thin. So here's the disturbing truth. Morality is a luxury, and when the world ends, you'll trade it for calories. The question is, would you have waited for Richard Parker to die on his own, or would you have sharpened the knife? Nietzsche's death of God. Without God, morality collapses. In a crowded marketplace, a man runs in holding a lantern. It's broad daylight. The people laugh. He shouts, "God is dead. God remains dead, and we have killed him." That's not a scene from fiction. That's Friedrich Nietzsche, in The Gay Science, writing one of the most famous and most misunderstood declarations in all of philosophy. God is dead wasn't celebration. It was diagnosis, a cultural obituary. Nietzsche saw that in modern Europe, people had stopped truly believing. Science had replaced creation stories. Morality no longer felt anchored in heaven, but they hadn't admitted it yet. They still clung to Christian values, compassion, guilt, humility, even after cutting the theological rope. Nietzsche's warning was simple. You can't keep the morals if you kill the God. He called it slave morality, a morality built not from strength or joy, but from resentment, born in the weak, glorifying suffering, obedience, and meekness. And if there's no God to enforce it, it collapses into nihilism, the belief that nothing has value, that no action is better than another. In The Will to Power, Nietzsche wrote that modern man faces a terrifying vacuum. What were we doing when we unchained this earth from its sun? Are we not plunging continually, backward, sideward, forward, in all directions? He feared that without a divine anchor, morality would become arbitrary. People would either cling to old dogmas they no longer believed, or invent shallow, herd-approved values, comfort, equality, mediocrity. That's why Nietzsche introduced the idea of the Übermensch, the one who creates new values. Not as a tyrant, but as an artist of life, someone who dares to say, if God is gone, then I must become the creator. If old morality has collapsed, I will forge new meaning. But here's the terrifying part. There are no instructions, no eternal truths, only the abyss and your courage. So Nietzsche asks, if the gods are dead and the heavens are silent, will you build new values from the ruins? Or will you decay with the crowd, pretending you still believe in what you've already buried? Eternal hell, infinite punishment for finite sin. Imagine stealing an apple and being burned alive for eternity. Not an hour, not a year, forever. That's the logic of eternal hell, one of the most disturbing and controversial ideas in religious philosophy. The concept that for a few decades of sin, a human being can be condemned to endless conscious torment, with no escape, no parole, no second chance. Philosophers have asked a simple question for centuries. How can a good God justify infinite punishment for finite actions? The ancient Greeks didn't believe in eternal damnation. Their underworld was dreary, but not torturous. Even Plato's version of hell in the Republic had a limit, 1,000 years for the worst crimes. The fire and brimstone version comes largely from later Christian theology. Augustine of Hippo, one of the early architects of Christian doctrine, believed hell's torments were just. Why? Because sin isn't measured by its duration or effect, but by who it's committed against. Offending an infinite God deserves an infinite sentence. But critics like 18th-century philosopher Immanuel Kant found this grotesque. He argued that morality must be proportional. Justice without proportion becomes cruelty. Even modern theologians like Thomas Talbot argue that if God is truly love, then eternal punishment contradicts divine nature. Then there's the psychological horror. What does belief in eternal hell do to a person? Children raised in fire and brimstone traditions often describe night terrors, panic attacks, and lifelong religious trauma. They're taught that thought crimes, doubts, sexual desires, even boredom during prayer could lead to eternal agony. Some defend hell by saying people choose it, that hell is self-imposed, the natural consequence of rejecting God. but who truly would choose torment? And if they're deluded or broken or traumatized, is that really free will? Others, like C.S. Lewis, tried to make hell metaphorical, a locked door from the inside. But for many traditions, hell is literal. Fire, screams, worms that do not die. The deeper question is this: what does it say about us or our gods if we believe in eternal punishment? Is hell justice, or the ultimate fantasy of vengeance? And if we were the ones condemned, would we still call it fair? Split brain experiments. One body, two minds. In the 1960s, a man named Joe had brain surgery that changed the way we understand the self. He wasn't mentally ill. He wasn't a philosopher. He had epilepsy so severe that doctors severed his corpus callosum, the thick bundle of nerves connecting the two hemispheres of the brain. It stopped the seizures, but it also revealed something disturbing. See, the two hemispheres of your brain aren't identical. The left side typically controls language. The right, spatial awareness and visual processing. Normally they share everything instantly through the corpus callosum. But when that bridge was cut, something unexpected happened. The two sides stopped communicating. Researchers began testing Joe. They showed words to only his right visual field, which is processed by the left hemisphere. No problem. He could say what he saw. But when they flashed a word to the left visual field, processed by the right hemisphere, he couldn't say what it was. Yet when asked to draw it with his left hand, he could. His right hemisphere knew, but couldn't speak. Even stranger, when each hemisphere was given a separate task, pick a favorite, draw a figure, they often disagreed. In one experiment, one hand tried to button a shirt while the other unbuttoned it. It was like two minds living in one skull. So who was Joe? Was he the speaking half, the left hemisphere? Was the silent right also him, but mute and trapped, could both have their own beliefs, desires, even awareness? This shattered the comforting idea that we are unified beings, that there's one coherent I piloting the body. Instead, the mind may be a fragile illusion stitched together by communication, not essence. Break the bridge, and the illusion breaks too. And if that's true, what does it mean for the rest of us? Are we all just bundles of systems barely cooperating? Could parts of your brain know things you don't, believe things you'd never admit, fight against you while pretending to be you? In a way, split-brain patients weren't broken. They were revealing something the rest of us are too integrated to notice. The self is not one voice. It's a parliament in disguise. And sometimes the speaker isn't even elected. The Tao cannot be named. Truth resists language. Taoism, Laozi. In the very first line of the Tao Tang, Laozi warns you, the Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal Tao, which is a strange start to a book that tries to speak about the Tao for 5,000 characters. But that's the point. The deepest truths, Laozi insists, dissolve when you try to name them, because naming is carving, and carving always separates. In ancient China, around the 6th century BCE, Laozi looked at the world of Confucian rituals, rules, and rigid moral codes, and quietly laughed. To him, truth wasn't found in rules, or logic, or ceremony. Truth was in the flow. The pattern beneath patterns, the Tao. The Tao is not a god, or a force, or a spirit. It's not even something. It's the nameless origin of everything, the way that nature unfolds when left alone. When rivers curve, clouds drift, animals act without worry, that's the Tao. It doesn't think. It doesn't strive. It simply is. Try to control it, and you lose it. In modern terms, imagine trying to describe the feeling of being in love by writing out your heart rate, neurotransmitter levels, and hormonal balance. You might be accurate, but you won't be true. Not in any way that matters. That's how Laozi felt about language. To him, the more we name and label and measure, the more we disconnect from what's real. The Tao is like water. It flows best when it's not forced. But our minds, conditioned by culture and ego, want to grab it, own it, define it, and that's when we fall out of sync. This is why Taoist sages often live in obscurity, in mountains or huts, walking barefoot and speaking rarely. They don't teach in lectures. They teach by living lightly, moving like wind through trees, leaving no footprints. And yet, we're here talking about it. That's the paradox. To speak of the Tao is to miss it, but to ignore it is to stay asleep. So we whisper instead, and hope that some part of you feels it in silence between the words. Dualism versus materialism. Are you a soul or just meat? Descartes. Let's start with a corpse. It's cold. It has eyes, but they don't see. A mouth, but it doesn't speak. Muscles, organs, nerves, everything is there. And yet, something is gone. The body remains, but the person doesn't. For centuries, this eerie disconnect led people to believe in a split. The body is just matter, but the mind, or soul, is something else. Something invisible, something immaterial. This is dualism, most famously argued by René Descartes, who said, "I think, therefore I am." For Descartes, the body was like a machine, and the mind, the thinking, feeling, conscious part, was a separate, ghostly pilot. It made sense. After all, how could a lump of gray meat in your skull produce love, fear, music, dreams? The soul seemed like the only explanation. But materialists disagree. They say, you are meat, no ghost, no soul, just a very complicated arrangement of atoms firing in complex patterns. Every thought you have, every feeling of joy or dread is just electricity dancing through neurons. You are your brain. And when your brain dies, so do you. This is disturbing because it means there's no afterlife, no floating consciousness, no you beyond the flesh. It's all circuits. When the brain breaks, so does the mind. Alzheimer's is proof. Stroke is proof. Remove a part of someone's brain, and you can erase their memories, their language, their personality. If the soul exists, why is it so fragile? Why does it bleed? But dualism has its own nightmare. If the mind and body are separate, how do they interact? How can a ghost touch meat? Where is the soul located? Descartes guessed the pineal gland, a tiny part of the brain, but never really explained how an immaterial mind could push physical neurons. Today, neuroscience leans toward materialism, but not comfortably. We still don't understand consciousness. We don't know how subjective experience, your inner movie, emerges from biology. If we're just bodies, why do we feel like more? So you're left with a choice. Either you are a soul inside a machine, or you are the machine pretending to be a soul. Either way, something terrifying follows. When your machine breaks, no one is left to scream. Zombies, creatures that act conscious but feel nothing. Imagine this. You're having a conversation with someone. Maybe they smile at your joke, cry during a movie, or scream in pain after stubbing their toe. But here's the twist. There's nothing behind their eyes. No awareness, no experience, no inner life. They're just responding the way a human should, like an actor hitting their cues, perfectly, but with no one home. This is the philosophical zombie, or zombie, a thought experiment that keeps philosophers awake at night. A zombie is behaviorally identical to you or me. It talks about consciousness. It claims to feel love, loss, hunger. It even writes philosophy essays about its feelings, but it doesn't actually experience anything. No pain, no joy, no color, no taste. It just behaves as though it does. Now here's the disturbing part. How do you know you're not surrounded by them? The zombie idea came into modern philosophy through thinkers like David Chalmers, who used it to challenge physicalism, the belief that everything, including consciousness, can be explained in physical terms. If we can imagine a world physically identical to ours, but where no one is conscious, just zombies pretending to be, then clearly something about consciousness is missing from the physical picture. It's not just philosophy. AI gives this idea a new edge. When a language model responds in perfect, intelligent-sounding sentences, it mimics understanding. So how do you know your coworker, your boss, your friend isn't doing the same? Worse, how do you know you aren't one? Could you be a P-zombie, just thinking you're conscious because your brain is programmed to insist you are? Some neuroscientists propose that consciousness is just a side effect, an illusion your brain evolved to narrate its own actions. It's useful to think you're conscious, but maybe you never really had any subjective experiences. Just brain activity, like the clattering of a typewriter convincing itself it's a poet, and that eerie moment when someone stares through you like you're not there. Maybe they're not, or maybe you're the one who isn't. Frankfurt Cases. You chose, but had no other option. You decide to tell the truth. No one forces you. You do it freely, or so it seems. But what you don't know is this. Someone was secretly watching. If you had tried to lie, they would have stopped you. But you didn't try, so they didn't intervene. You felt free, but you couldn't have chosen otherwise. Did you really choose? This is the puzzle behind Frankfurt Cases, named after philosopher Harry Frankfurt, who in 1969 shook the free will debate with one unsettling idea. You can be morally responsible for a choice, even if you couldn't have done otherwise. Traditionally, we believed in something called the principle of alternate possibilities. If you're morally responsible, it must be because you could have chosen differently. Frankfurt disagreed. He imagined scenarios, now called Frankfurt-style cases, where you seem to act freely, yet there's a backup plan ensuring you couldn't have chosen another path. Picture a political assassin. He chooses to pull the trigger, but if he had hesitated, a device implanted in his brain would have fired the shot anyway. He never knew the device existed. He chose it on his own. Was he free? More importantly, is he responsible? Frankfurt says yes, because he acted willingly. The fact that alternatives were blocked behind the scenes? Irrelevant. This raises disturbing possibilities. You might feel free, while invisible forces prevent deviation. You might take credit for actions that were the only allowed path. It's not science fiction. Think of how algorithms shape your feed. If you always choose the same kind of content because it's the only thing you're shown, did you choose it? Or were your alternatives removed so seamlessly you never noticed you were being directed? Frankfurt's point wasn't that freedom is fake, but that moral responsibility doesn't require open doors. You can be held accountable even when no other road existed, because what matters, he says, is what you wanted to do, not whether you could have done something else. But here's the question left behind. If you never saw the cage, does that mean it wasn't there? And if every choice you make could survive in a world with no alternatives, what, exactly, is freedom? Bundle theory of self. There is no unified you, Hume. You close your eyes and try to find yourself, not your body, not your name, not your job, just you, the self behind the thoughts. But no matter how hard you look, you don't find a stable core. Just fragments, a passing memory, a flicker of anger, the echo of a childhood fear. Nothing holds still. This was the nightmare insight of David Hume, an 18th-century Scottish philosopher with the charm of a skeptic and the mind of a wrecking ball. He asked a simple question. When you introspect, what do you actually see? Not a single unified self, just a shifting stream of sensations, perceptions, emotions, and ideas. He called it a bundle. Like a bundle of sticks, your mind is just a collection of mental events tied loosely together by habit, not identity. There is no soul holding it all in place. No central I, just the illusion of continuity. A flickering slideshow stitched together by memory and language. That sounds abstract, until it's not. People with dissociative identity disorder, formerly called multiple personality disorder, experience this firsthand. They can shift between identities with different names, voices, even handwriting. So which one is the real self? Or take the case of split-brain patients whose corpus callosum, the bridge between the two brain hemispheres, has been severed to treat epilepsy. In lab experiments, their left and right hands can act in direct conflict, or even hide objects from each other. One side of the brain may laugh while the other frowns, two streams of awareness trapped in one body. If the self were unified, this shouldn't be possible, but it is, and it happens in you too. Your morning self sets a 6 a.m. alarm. Your midnight self hits snooze 5 times. Your sober self swears off alcohol. Your stressed self pours another drink. These selves argue, sabotage each other, make peace. You are not one person. You are a civil war. The bundle theory says that identity is a narrative illusion, a convenience, something we tell ourselves to feel whole, when in truth we're a patchwork of tendencies, roles, and reactions. So who are you, really? You're the story being told by the chaos inside your skull. And sometimes, the characters don't even like each other. Compatibilism. You're free, but only if you define freedom weirdly. Hume. You walk into a coffee shop. You pick the chai latte over the cappuccino. It feels like a free choice. No one forced you, but rewind the tape. You chose chai because you're tired, because you slept poorly, because your neighbor's dog barked all night, because he left his window open, because his daughter came home late, because the choice felt free. But was it? Compatibilism says, yes, you are free, even if determinism is true. This view was championed by philosophers like David Hume and later Daniel Dennett. They argue that freedom doesn't mean being uncaused. It means being uncoursed. In other words, you're free if no one is holding a gun to your head, even if your brain was shaped by forces you didn't choose. It's a clever move. Compatibilists redefine free will to fit inside a deterministic universe. Your actions may be caused, yes, but if they're caused through your own character, your own desires, then you're still responsible. You might not have picked your preferences, but if your choices flow from who you are, then they still count as yours. Think of it like this. You write a letter by hand. Sure, your muscles obey physics. But the content, the message, still belongs to you. That's compatibilism. But critics aren't convinced. They say compatibilism is free will with the teeth pulled out. Because if you didn't choose your preferences, your upbringing, your desires, your personality, then saying your action came from you is just linguistic smoke. It's like programming a robot to want cookies and then praising it for choosing dessert over fruit. Compatibilism makes you feel morally in control, but it quietly accepts that your decisions were always inevitable. Still, many scientists, judges, and everyday people adopt this view because it offers a way to hold people responsible without needing a magical soul floating outside causality. And in real life, maybe that's enough. Maybe freedom is not absolute, but just a useful fiction like money, nations, or time. So when you choose the chai, maybe it's not a rebellion against the universe. Maybe it's just your programming expressing itself without interference. And if that's freedom, maybe we've been using the word wrong all along. Foucault's power theory. Truth is whatever keeps you controlled. Imagine a prison with no guards, just a tall central tower and the threat that someone might be watching you. You don't know when, you don't know who, but they could be watching at any moment. That's enough. This was Jeremy Bentham's idea of the panopticon, a circular prison where visibility equals control. But Michel Foucault took it further. He said, that's not just a prison, that's society. Foucault wasn't interested in whether something is true in the philosophical sense. He wanted to know who benefits when we call something true, who gets power when an idea becomes a rule. Take madness. In the Middle Ages, the mad were tolerated as fools or seers, but by the 18th century, medicine declared them sick. Doctors locked them away. Their behavior was pathologized, not because they were more dangerous, but because society had decided these people must be normalized. Truth became something institutional, Education doesn't just teach facts. It creates acceptable knowledge. Schools don't just inform. They shape what counts as intelligence. Sexuality isn't just natural. It's categorized, labeled, monitored, even confession. Once a religious act became a psychological one. Tell the doctor your secrets, and they'll label you accordingly. The terrifying part? Foucault said modern power doesn't crush you. It shapes you. It doesn't need to punish you. You'll punish yourself. In the panopticon of society, you're the one who disciplines your own body, your own thoughts, your own desires, because you've internalized the gaze. You've learned what's normal, and anything else becomes shame. Truth, in this system, is never neutral. It's produced by networks of institutions, medicine, education, law, not because they discovered it, but because they declared it. Foucault called this power knowledge. Every regime of truth comes with a structure of enforcement. Every accepted fact comes with invisible rules. You don't notice it. You grow up in it. You think it's natural. You call it reality. But your truth might be a perfectly calibrated form of social control, designed not to liberate you, but to make sure you never realize you were in a cage. Because the most effective prisons don't have bars. They have ideas. Existentialism. There's no purpose. You must invent it. You weren't born with a script. There's no master plan, no cosmic checklist, no hidden mission waiting for you to decode. That's existentialism. In its purest and most terrifying form, there is no purpose unless you invent one. Jean-Paul Sartre, the French philosopher who helped define modern existentialism, put it bluntly, existence precedes essence. In other words, you exist first as a raw, unformed being, and only later through your actions, choices, and failures do you become something. You're not a tool designed for a task. You're a blank page being written as you go. That sounds empowering, until you feel the weight of it. Take the example of Antoine Roquentin, the protagonist in Sartre's novel Nausea. Roquentin suddenly realizes that the world around him, the trees, his body, the very idea of time, feels hollow, pointless, even revolting. He's overwhelmed by the absurdity that things simply are without explanation, and he begins to panic. Why is he alive? Why should he write? Love? Eat? None of it has meaning unless he gives it meaning. And this is where existentialism bites. You can't rely on God, tradition, morality, or society to define you. If you do, you're living in what Sartre called bad faith, lying to yourself to avoid your own freedom, because freedom is terrifying. It means you are radically responsible for who you become. Simone de Beauvoir took this further. In The Ethics of Ambiguity, she argued that since no fixed meaning exists, ethics must be invented too, not from universal rules, but from the shared condition of human freedom. You must act in ways that honor freedom, yours and others, even as you acknowledge the crushing absurdity that none of it is required. Consider the existential crisis of someone like Viktor Frankl, a psychiatrist imprisoned in a Nazi concentration camp, stripped of everything, family, identity, clothing, even his name. Frankl found purpose not in what was given to him, but in what he chose to hold on to, his will to give life meaning. He later wrote Man's Search for Meaning to describe how, even in a void, humans can create direction. Existentialism doesn't promise peace. It offers responsibility. It tells you that the world doesn't owe you meaning, and if you want it, you'll have to build it yourself from scratch while trembling. Absurdism camus. Life is meaningless. Embrace it anyway. Imagine pushing a boulder up a hill forever. Every time you reach the top, it rolls back down. You trudge back down after it. Again and again. No reward, no escape, just repetition. That's the myth of Sisyphus. And for Albert Camus, it's not just a Greek story, it's you, it's all of us. Camus wasn't exactly an existentialist, though people often lump him in with them. His philosophy was absurdism. The absurd for him is what happens when the human desire for meaning crashes against a silent, indifferent universe. You want answers. The universe gives you nothing but static. No signs, no grand design, just the void. The natural reaction? Despair? Or nihilism? Or suicide? What Camus called the only truly serious philosophical problem. But instead of giving in, he proposed something else. Rebellion without hope. You stare into the meaningless and choose to live anyway. Not because it gets better, but because it doesn't, and you still move forward. That's why Camus called Sisyphus a hero. Yes, he's doomed, but he becomes free the moment he stops hoping for release and embraces his fate. One must imagine Sisyphus happy, Camus writes, not because he's deluded, but because he's lucid. He knows the world is absurd and still chooses to face it without flinching. Take Meursault, the emotionally detached main character of The Stranger. He doesn't cry at his mother's funeral. He doesn't fake emotions. He drifts through life until he kills a man in a moment of sunblind confusion. Even at his trial, he refuses to pretend he cares about God or guilt. Only at the end, when sentenced to die, does he reach peace. Not because he finds meaning, but because he accepts that there is none. Absurdism isn't comfortable. It's defiant. Camus didn't believe in suicide, not physical or philosophical. He believed in the strange joy of continuing without reason. Like a character in a Kafka novel who never gets answers but refuses to stop asking questions anyway. The absurd life, Camus says, is lived without appeal. No gods, no justifications. Only the raw, unfiltered absurd. And in that, somehow, there is still room for dignity. Even joy, you don't overcome the absurd. You live with it and keep walking. Eternal recurrence. Would you relive this life forever? Close your eyes and imagine this. Every moment of your life, every conversation, every regret, every stomachache, every awkward silence, every betrayal, every bite of food repeated. Not just once, but forever. Again and again. With no changes, no escape, no edit button. That's eternal recurrence. Nietzsche didn't present it as scientific theory, but as an existential test. He described it like a thought experiment whispered to you by a demon. This life, as you now live it, you will have to live once more and innumerable times more. And the question is, would you scream in horror? Or would you say, yes, I want this? It's brutal, because most people live as if they'll get a do-over, or that one day things will finally start. But eternal recurrence rips away the idea of a second chance. It's a loop with no way out, no redemption arc, only repetition. Nietzsche wasn't offering a mystical prophecy. He was forcing you to confront how you're living right now. Are your days so meaningless, so passive, that the idea of reliving them is a nightmare? Or are you living with such intensity, such fierce presence, that you'd choose it again, gladly? It's a philosophical weapon, a mirror held to your life, but tilted just enough to distort the illusion of linear time. It's easy to live like today doesn't count. Eternal recurrence says, this is all there is. Would you live this moment again and again and again? In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Nietzsche presents this as the highest form of affirmation, not accepting life despite its suffering, but precisely because of it. Joy to him isn't some sanitized state of peace. It's the strength to say yes to everything, even agony, failure, humiliation, if it means you lived fully. For Nietzsche, the one who can embrace eternal recurrence is the true creator, the one who doesn't wish for another world, who doesn't escape into fantasies or afterlives, but instead sculpts the now so deliberately that they wouldn't change a thing even if they could. It's not about fate, it's about responsibility and the terrifying freedom of having to say, this is my life, and I accept it forever. The Panopticon. You behave because you think you're watched. There's a prison design from the 18th century that no one ever forgot, not because it was built everywhere, but because it never had to be. the panopticon. Jeremy Bentham proposed it as a humane reform. A circular prison with cells all around the edge and a single dark tower in the center. From that tower, one guard could theoretically watch any prisoner at any time. The twist: the prisoners would never know when they were being watched, so they'd behave constantly, just in case. But the genius of the panopticon wasn't architectural, it was psychological. It didn't require actual surveillance, just the possibility of surveillance. The threat was in the uncertainty, and eventually, it didn't matter if anyone was in the tower at all. The prisoners would watch themselves. Michel Foucault saw in this design a metaphor for modern society. He argued that the panopticon wasn't a failed prison blueprint, it was the model for how power now works, not through force, but through internalized control. In medieval times, a king showed power by displaying violence, public executions, branding, whips. You obeyed because of fear and because the body could be broken. Modern power is subtler, more efficient. It doesn't punish you, it trains you. It doesn't need to hurt your body. It gets inside your head. Schools grade you. Workplaces track you. Social media rewards and punishes your behavior with invisible metrics. You curate yourself, edit your thoughts, filter your face, not because someone told you to, but because the gaze has already been absorbed. In a real panopticon, the guard might never look, but you still sit up straight. In today's world, surveillance is distributed. The camera is your phone. The observer is the algorithm. The punishment is social exclusion, reputation damage, getting canceled, losing the job offer you didn't know you were being interviewed for. You become your own guard. And this isn't just theoretical. Schools with facial recognition, offices with keystroke monitors, countries where jaywalkers are ID'd and fined via AI cameras. But even in places without tech, the structure remains. Peer pressure, performance reviews, good vibes only. We smile, not because we feel safe, but because we know someone's watching. Foucault warned, the brilliance of the panopticon is that it makes tyranny invisible. You don't see the bars, you feel them. You don't resent the guard, you become him. And maybe the most terrifying part is this: the moment we realize we're being watched is the moment we stop needing watchers. Pascal's wager: believe in God, just in case. You're at the edge of a coin toss. Heads: God exists. Tails: he doesn't. You don't get to flip the coin, but you do have to bet your life on one side. This is the setup for Pascal's wager, a 17th century argument by mathematician and philosopher Blaise Pascal. And it's not about theology, it's about risk. Pascal wasn't trying to prove God exists. He said you can't prove it, not with reason, not with evidence. So instead of asking, is God real, he asks, what's the safest bet? If you believe in God and you're wrong, you lose nothing. If you believe and you're right, you gain eternal bliss. But if you don't believe and you're wrong, you risk infinite punishment. So Pascal argues, the rational thing is to believe, just in case. It's spiritual insurance. But this argument is quietly horrifying, because it's not about love or faith, it's about self-preservation. A belief born not from conviction, but fear of consequences. Imagine marrying someone, not because you love them, but because you're scared of being alone forever. Is that faith or manipulation? Pascal anticipated this criticism. He suggested you start by acting like a believer. Go to church, say the prayers, live the life, and over time the belief might follow. It's fake it till you feel it, for eternity. But critics push back. Which God are you betting on? The Christian God, Allah, Shiva? What if the true God punishes those who believe for selfish reasons? Then Pascal's wager becomes a trap, rewarding hypocrisy, punishing honest doubt. And deeper still, what kind of deity wants belief as a gamble? What kind of morality is built on hedging? Pascal's wager reveals the dark logic of fear-based faith. Believe, not because it's true, but because the penalty for being wrong is unbearable. Today, versions of the wager persist. Just say the prayer. Why take the risk? Wouldn't it be safer to believe? It sounds reasonable until you realize it's not about God at all. It's about you, bargaining with the unknown. So here's the question Pascal forces you to face. Do you want to believe? Or are you just terrified of what happens if you don't? Utilitarianism. What if murder is good if it helps enough people? Bentham, Mill. In 1943, British intelligence faced a brutal dilemma. A German U-boat commander was destroying Allied ships in the Atlantic. British codebreakers had cracked the Enigma cipher and knew exactly where the submarine would be. They also knew how to stop it by alerting a nearby convoy. But if they acted, the Germans would realize Enigma had been compromised. So the British let hundreds of sailors die to save thousands more in the long run. This is utilitarianism in action. At its core, utilitarianism is terrifyingly simple. The right action is the one that produces the greatest happiness for the greatest number. Jeremy Bentham, its founder, even proposed a mathematical philosophic calculus for calculating pleasure versus pain. John Stuart Mill refined it by distinguishing higher pleasures like poetry from lower ones like eating. But the core remains: maximize utility. This sounds noble until it demands blood. Would you kill one healthy person to harvest organs that would save 5 dying patients? If you hesitate, you're not a consistent utilitarian. In theory, saving 5 lives outweighs killing 1. But this cold logic begins to unravel our moral instincts. Take the famous trolley problem. A train is barreling toward 5 people. You can pull a lever to divert it, killing just 1 person instead. Most people say yes, but now imagine you have to push a man off a bridge to stop the train with his body. Same numbers, different reaction. Why? Because utilitarianism doesn't care about means, only outcomes, but we do. And here's the danger. When numbers justify actions, human dignity becomes expendable. Under strict utilitarian reasoning, torture is fine if it prevents enough suffering. Propaganda is fine if it keeps the peace. Genocide could, horrifyingly, be justified if it leads to a utopia for the survivors. In the 20th century, these ideas took root in political ideologies. Mao's Great Leap Forward led to millions of deaths, but was defended as a necessary sacrifice for future prosperity. The logic: short-term horror, long-term gain. Utilitarianism forces us to confront an unnerving question: is morality just math? If yes, then everything, even murder, can be justified as long as enough people benefit. But if no, then how do we decide what's truly right? What if morality is only terrifying when it starts making sense? Kant's duty ethics. Lying is always immoral, even to save a life. Imagine a knock at your door in 1942. You're hiding a Jewish family in your attic. A Nazi officer stands in front of you and asks, "Are there Jews in this house?" If you lie, you save lives. If you tell the truth, they'll die. For most people, the moral choice is clear. Lie. Protect the innocent. But for Immanuel Kant, one of the most influential moral philosophers in history, that lie would be morally wrong, always. Kant's moral system isn't built on consequences. It doesn't care what happens after your action. It's built on duty, what he calls the categorical imperative. Act only according to that maxim which you could will to become a universal law. In other words, only do what you believe everyone should always do. So if you lie to save a life, you're saying it's acceptable to lie whenever the outcome seems good. But if everyone did that, trust would collapse. Promises would mean nothing. Truth itself would dissolve. So lying, for Kant, is always immoral. This is not cold logic. It's a radical commitment to human dignity. Kant believed people should never be used as tools, even for noble ends. Every human being, he said, is an end in themselves, not a means to someone else's goal. That's why lying, even to protect, is seen as using the person you deceive as a tool, without respecting their right to the truth. But this view is haunting. In Kant's world, moral purity may demand real-world horror. If a murderer comes to your door asking for your friend and you lie to protect them, you've done wrong. You've stained your moral integrity. In a chilling twist, it means letting evil happen is morally better than becoming complicit in a lie. This rigidity is both Kant's strength and his terror. He offers a world where morality is solid, unwavering, immune to manipulation. But he also builds a prison, a world where mercy might be immoral, where kindness can be unethical. In the end, Kant's ethics challenge us to ask, is it better to be good or to do good? And what happens when those two come into conflict? What if the moral high ground is the coldest place to stand? Nietzsche's master morality. Pity is a tool of the weak. Friedrich Nietzsche never flinched. When others moralized suffering, he celebrated it. When others praised kindness, he raised an eyebrow. And when others told you that pity was a virtue, Nietzsche called it a sickness. To understand why, we need to rewind history, not just to the 19th century, when Nietzsche wrote, but far deeper, to the roots of morality itself. Nietzsche believed that there wasn't just one kind of morality. There were two, and they came from two very different kinds of people. The first, he called master morality. The second, slave morality. Let's start with the masters. Picture ancient aristocrats, Roman generals, Athenian warriors, Viking lords. These weren't good men in our modern sense. They were strong, proud, dangerous. To them, good meant powerful, noble, self-asserting, and bad, weak, cowardly, ugly, dependent. They didn't apologize for their strength. They didn't pity the weak. They admired beauty, excellence, force, and most of all, honor. Now enter the slaves, not literal slaves, but the humiliated, the defeated, the sick, the poor, the excluded. They looked up at these lords of the earth and saw arrogance, cruelty, and contempt. But they couldn't fight back physically, so they fought morally. And here's where it gets twisted. Nietzsche argues that slave morality was born as a kind of revenge. The weak couldn't become strong, so they redefined strength as evil. They couldn't attain greatness, so they called humility a virtue. They couldn't stand pride, so they glorified pity, meekness, and self-denial. It was the inversion of values, and Nietzsche thought it was brilliant and deadly. In this new morality, pity became sacred. The one who suffers the most, closest to God. The one who sacrifices himself, the purest soul. The one who turns the other cheek, embraces the cross, renounces desire, becomes a saint. Nietzsche saw this shift not as progress, but as a slow moral disease. Because when you start worshiping weakness, suffering becomes currency, pain becomes power. And instead of rising to greatness, people sink to be seen. Think about it. In a culture where suffering is virtue, who wins? The strong, or the best at being victims? Nietzsche looked at Christianity and saw this in full bloom. A religion that began among the persecuted, the slaves of Rome, and preached love, humility, and compassion. But also guilt, sin, self-denial, the morality that tells you blessed are the poor, blessed are the meek, blessed are those who mourn. For Nietzsche, this wasn't holiness, it was resentment wearing a halo. He called it ressentiment, not just resentment, but a deep, seething hatred masked as morality. A hatred of the strong, of the joyful, of the unapologetically alive. And pity was the venom, because it turned suffering into virtue and trapped humanity in chains of guilt. To Nietzsche, the highest human being wasn't the saint. It was the Übermensch, the one who creates his own values, stands alone, embraces life in all its pain and glory. But in a world ruled by slave morality, the Übermensch would be crucified, mocked, hated. Not for his cruelty, but for daring to live without apology. This wasn't abstract for Nietzsche. He lived it. He watched 19th century Europe rot from the inside, with its industrial conformity, its moralizing masses, its herd instinct. He saw people praise humility while climbing social ladders. He saw people pity the poor while fearing them. He saw people perform goodness, not because they were good, but because they wanted to be seen as good. He called them the last men, the dull, comfort-seeking, risk-averse humans who would inherit the earth, not through strength, but by lowering the bar for everyone. And if that sounds familiar, that's because Nietzsche was prophetic. Even today, pity is power. To suffer is to be believed. To be oppressed is to be elevated. The victim becomes the saint. The saint becomes the celebrity. Nietzsche wasn't against compassion. But he warned, pity runs counter to the tonic emotions which heighten our vitality. It has a depressive effect. We are deprived of strength when we feel pity. And if society builds itself around pity, guilt, and suffering, it stops growing. It worships wounds, it rewards weakness, and it quietly kills greatness. So next time you feel a pang of guilt for being strong, or you're told to step aside, lower your voice, or apologize for success, ask yourself, is this morality, or is it resentment in disguise? Because for Nietzsche, the scariest morality was not the one that punished evil. It was the one that punished strength by calling it evil. Moral relativism. No act is inherently good or evil. Montaigne. Cultural pluralism. You're walking through a market. You see a man slap his wife in public. No one reacts. Children watch. Vendors laugh. You're horrified. But they're not. Who's wrong? Now imagine this. It's 1630. A man is being burned alive in a town square. Why? Because he denied the Virgin Mary. Women and children pray while the flames rise. They call it justice. You call it barbaric. But they thought you were the heretic. This is the unsettling terrain of moral relativism, the idea that there's no universal morality, that what's right and wrong is not carved into the fabric of the universe. It's written by cultures, rewritten by tribes, and constantly shifting in time. And the deeper you go, the more disturbing this idea becomes. Let's start with the basics. In the West, we often talk about human rights, the right to free speech, bodily autonomy, education, equality. We treat these values as obvious, natural, self-evident. But go back just a few centuries, and these rights vanish. Slavery wasn't just tolerated, it was defended by Aristotle, justified by St. Paul, and protected by law in every major empire for thousands of years. Child marriage was normal. Torture was entertainment. Genocide was strategy. And it wasn't that people didn't know better. They just defined morality differently. In many indigenous warrior cultures, killing an enemy wasn't a sin, it was a sacred duty. Among some Pacific tribes, cannibalism wasn't horror, it was honor. In ancient Sparta, stealing wasn't immoral, getting caught was, and here's the twist, they weren't immoral societies. They had rules, honor codes, rituals, justice systems, just not ours. This is the heart of moral relativism, the belief that morality is always local. What's wrong in one culture may be righteous in another. There is no God's eye view, no final judge, no universal code. And if you think this is just academic, consider this. In 1971, cultural anthropologist Richard Schweder documented child-rearing practices in India that Westerners considered abusive, strict caste separations, early arranged marriages, forced religious obligations. But when Indian scholars examined American parenting, neglecting elders, glorifying individualism, tolerating teen rebellion, they saw moral decay. Who's right? Or take the famous example from anthropology, the Yanomami people of the Amazon jungle, who engage in ritual warfare, infanticide, and violent initiation rites. To them, violence isn't evil, it's how social order is maintained. Western observers call it brutality. They call it life. And here's the question you're not supposed to ask. What makes your moral code better? If you say because it reduces suffering, that's your culture's value. If you say because it respects freedom, that's your lens. If you say because it's human nature, whose nature? In what conditions? Even the Nazis believed they were doing moral work. They preached purity, loyalty, duty, and sacrifice. They punished traitors and rewarded heroes. By their definition, moral relativism doesn't mean anything goes. It means every moral system thinks it's right, and none of them agree. Even today, global ethics collide constantly. Freedom of speech versus blasphemy laws. Gay rights versus religious doctrine. Feminism versus traditional family honor. Individual autonomy versus communal duty. And every side thinks they're protecting something sacred. Some philosophers try to escape this by proposing moral objectivism, the idea that certain values must be universal: the right to live, the wrongness of torture, the evil of genocide. But history mocks these hopes, because every supposed universal has been violated and justified. And here's the disturbing implication. If moral relativism is true, then there is no absolute evil, only disagreement, only competing codes. What we call progress might just be cultural drift. What we call justice might just be fashion with moral branding. And the atrocities we condemn in others, they might be reflections of what we'd call good if we were born elsewhere. So here's the question that moral relativism leaves us with, and it's not comfortable. Is evil real, or is it just someone else's good wearing the wrong clothes? Egoism. You owe nothing to anyone but yourself. Ayn Rand. There's a moment, maybe you've had it too, where you're sitting at a dinner table, smiling politely at a friend's story you've heard 3 times. You nod, you fake a laugh, and somewhere deep in the back of your mind, a quiet voice asks, why am I doing this? Do I really care, or am I just playing the role they need me to play? This is where egoism begins, not in selfishness, but in the refusal to lie about motivation. Egoism, in its pure form, is the view that the self is the only proper source of moral concern. That every action you take, no matter how kind, generous, or noble, is ultimately for yourself. To most people, that sounds like a diagnosis. To egoists, it's a revelation. Let's start with a thought experiment. A man runs into traffic to save a child. He's hailed as a hero. But why did he do it? Some say empathy, others say instinct. But an egoist asks, what if he did it to avoid guilt, to feel like a good person, to be remembered? Strip it down far enough, and every act of kindness has a self-serving edge. And that's not necessarily bad, but it's not virtuous either. The most unapologetic voice of egoism in modern philosophy was Ayn Rand, a Russian-American writer who built an entire moral philosophy called Objectivism, centered on the sacredness of individual interest. Her argument was simple. You don't owe anyone your time, your money, your empathy, or your sacrifice. Altruism, she said, is a weapon used to control you. In her novel The Fountainhead, the protagonist is an architect named Howard Roark. He doesn't care about fame, approval, or public service. He only cares about building things that reflect his own vision. When his design is changed by a committee, he dynamites the building himself, not out of malice, but out of integrity. To Rand, Rock isn't a criminal. He's the moral ideal, a man who refuses to live for others. It's easy to dismiss this as arrogance. But pause for a moment. How many things have you done out of guilt? How often have you said yes when you meant no? Given your time, your money, your love, not because you wanted to, but because you should. Egoism peels back that mask. It asks you, if you had no audience, no praise, no reward, would you still be good? Now let's go darker. Imagine a world where everyone acts only for themselves. No one donates to charity unless it makes them feel powerful. No one tells the truth unless it benefits them. Every friend is transactional. Every relationship, a contract. Sound horrifying? Maybe. But are we so different now? Corporate philanthropy is tax write-offs. Social justice becomes branding. Even love is filtered through dopamine, status, and fear of loneliness. Egoism doesn't create this world. It just stops pretending it's anything else. Historically, the idea of egoism has terrified moral philosophers. Thomas Hobbes, in the 17th century, argued that humans are naturally self-interested beasts and that civilization itself is just a truce, a way to keep each other from tearing each other apart. He wrote that in the state of nature, no government, no rules, life would be solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. So we make contracts, we obey laws, not because it's noble, but because we're afraid. Later, Friedrich Nietzsche would come at it from another angle. He didn't condemn egoism, he celebrated it as the instinct of the strong. To him, self-sacrifice and pity were tools of the weak to bind the strong. He saw moral systems not as truth, but as strategies in the war of values. And maybe he had a point. Because if you're honest, you've probably helped people and felt secretly superior. You've probably done good things and wanted recognition. You've posted a donation or a protest or a tearful story and waited for likes. Egoism doesn't deny that people can do generous things. It simply asks, why? If the true motive is internal, to feel righteous, to escape guilt, to avoid shame, then the act is still ego-driven. This is why egoism disturbs. Because it suggests there's no such thing as pure goodness. Even a mother's love may be evolutionary programming. Even a martyr's death may be driven by the need to believe in meaning. But here's where it gets strange. What if egoism isn't evil? What if self-interest is the foundation of all stable morality? You don't kill because you don't want to be killed. You don't lie because you want to be trusted. You help others because you want to live in a world where people help you. That's not selfishness. That's survival. So here's the final paradox. If we all acted only for ourselves, openly, honestly, would the world fall apart? Or would it finally be honest? Because maybe the most dangerous lie isn't selfishness. Maybe it's pretending we're ever anything else. Antinatalism. Birth is a moral harm. David Benatar. Most people believe that creating life is a good thing. Birthdays are celebrations. Parenthood is a virtue. To give life, we say, is to give a gift. But what if that's wrong? What if creating life isn't generous, but cruel? This is the unsettling idea behind antinatalism, a serious philosophical position that argues bringing someone into existence is always a moral harm. It's not nihilism. It's not depression in disguise. It's a rational, ethical argument. And once you hear it, you may never see life the same way again. Let's begin with a name. David Benatar, a South African philosopher and author of Better Never to Have Been. His argument is deceptively simple. He says, the presence of pain is bad. The presence of pleasure is good, but the absence of pain is good. Even if no one experiences that good. And the absence of pleasure is not bad, unless someone is deprived of it. What does that mean? Imagine a child is born into a peaceful home, given every advantage, and lives a relatively happy life. Even then, they will suffer illness, grief, aging, betrayal, eventually death. None of that suffering was chosen. Now imagine they were never born. They wouldn't miss happiness. They wouldn't mourn lost experiences. They simply wouldn't exist. And Benatar argues that non-existence is better because while life brings both pleasure and pain, non-existence guarantees neither. And no one suffers from not existing. Let's go darker. In 2006, a man in India named Raphael Samuel sued his parents. Why? For giving birth to him without his consent. He argued that if life contains inevitable suffering, and if we cannot ask the unborn whether they wish to exist, then bringing someone into the world is always a violation. The case was dismissed. But the question stayed. What if you have no moral right to create a being who cannot opt out? You might say, but life can be beautiful. Sure, but do you know that in advance? What if your child is born into war? What if they suffer from unrelenting depression? What if they grow to resent the very gift you gave? Imagine this. You invent a sentient machine. It will feel joy and agony. It will experience love and betrayal. And eventually, you will turn it off. Would you still flip the switch? Would you call that act compassion or cruelty? Antinatalists would say, you played God, and you gambled with someone else's pain. This isn't just a modern thought. In ancient Greece, Sophocles wrote, never to have been born is best, but having seen the light, the next best is to go back quickly. And in the book of Ecclesiastes, so I praised the dead who are already dead more than the living who are still alive. But better than both is the one who has not yet been. Even in Buddhism, existence itself is dukkha, suffering. To be born is to enter a cycle of craving, loss, aging, and death. Modern cultures hide this. We celebrate new births with cake and photos. We avoid hospitals and graveyards. We pretend death is optional and pain is meaningful. But antinatalism strips away the illusions. It says, if suffering is real and life guarantees it, then choosing life for someone else is an imposition, not a gift. The counter-arguments are strong. What about love? What about art, music, friendship, discovery? Benatar responds, all pleasures are experienced by the already living. We shouldn't confuse the joy we find in surviving with justification for bringing others into that struggle. And besides, he says, most people are poor judges of their own well-being. Cognitive dissonance keeps us believing life is good. We tell ourselves it's worth it because we have no alternative. But if you surveyed people in moments of raw honesty, during heartbreak, war, illness, grief, would they choose life again? There's one more layer. If we believe it's wrong to cause unnecessary harm, and if birth guarantees some harm, then choosing to procreate becomes a moral gamble with someone else's body and mind. Even the desire to continue your family line becomes suspect. Are you creating life for them or for you? To carry your name, to experience parenting, to fill a void? But the new person has no choice. Antinatalism isn't about despair. It's about ethics. It asks, is it morally better to spare someone pain, even if it costs them joy they'll never miss? It asks you to look a newborn in the face and admit they didn't ask for this, and they never could. Divine command theory, rape or murder is right. If God says so, Euthyphro dilemma. Imagine a man walks into a room and says, I've received a message from God. He tells you, kill your child, burn a village, stone the blasphemer. Do you obey? Most people recoil. But then again, this exact scenario is not fiction. It's in the Bible. Genesis 22. Abraham is told by God to kill his own son, Isaac. Not metaphorically, not symbolically. Knife to the throat. And Abraham agrees. Not because he wants to, but because God commanded it. In the end, God stops him. It's a test. But the message is clear. Obedience is higher than reason. Submission is the ultimate virtue. Welcome to divine command theory, one of the oldest and most controversial theories of morality in the history of philosophy. At its core, the idea is simple. What is morally right is whatever God commands. What is morally wrong is whatever God forbids. It doesn't matter if it seems cruel. It doesn't matter if it feels unfair. If God says it, it is good, by definition. This was the dominant moral framework across civilizations for millennia. In medieval Christendom, in Islamic jurisprudence, in ancient Judaism, in tribal spiritual systems from Africa to Asia, morality was not discovered. It was revealed, and that made it unquestionable. But philosophy, by nature, questions. And one of the first to challenge divine command theory was Plato, 400 years ago, long before Christianity, long before Islam. In his dialogue Euthyphro, Socrates asks a devastating question. Is something good because the gods command it, or do the gods command it because it is good? It sounds innocent, but it's lethal. If something is good only because God commands it, then morality is arbitrary. God could command genocide, and it would be good. God could command rape, and you'd have to obey. But if God commands things because they're good, then morality exists independently of God, and God is just a messenger, not the author. So either morality is meaningless without God, or morality doesn't need him at all. That's the Euthyphro dilemma, and it has haunted theology for centuries. Because history is full of horrors justified by divine command. The Crusades, where Christian armies slaughtered thousands in the name of holy war. The Inquisition, where heretics were burned alive for defying doctrine. The Salem witch trials, where girls were hanged for supposed contact with demons. Jihadist terror, where suicide bombers scream God's name as they kill. Hindu caste violence, apartheid theology, Mormon polygamy, the list goes on. Each time the logic is the same. God said it, so it must be right. But what happens when two people hear different commands? What happens when your God's law contradicts mine? Now morality becomes a contest of revelations. And whoever has the bigger crowd, the older book, the louder preacher, wins. Modern defenders of divine command theory try to soften it. They say, God is all good, so he would never command evil. But that avoids the point. The original idea wasn't that God chooses the good. It's that whatever he chooses becomes good. If tomorrow God told you to kill your pet, would it be murder or obedience? This is what makes divine command theory so terrifying. It removes human judgment from the equation. It asks you to surrender your conscience. It says, don't ask why. Don't question the order. Morality is not for you to understand. Your job is to obey. In this view, doubt is sin, and moral reasoning is pride. It's not just a religious problem. Every authoritarian regime borrows from divine command logic. The dictator becomes the voice. The party becomes the prophet, and morality becomes whatever the supreme leader declares. Think of North Korea. Think of cults like Heaven's Gate or Jonestown. Think of states that justify execution, torture, censorship in the name of higher truths. They don't reason, they command. But here's the darkest part. Sometimes we want this. We want to be told what's right. We want clear rules. We want the burden of moral judgment taken off our shoulders. Divine command theory offers that. It gives you clarity at the cost of freedom. So the question is not just, is God the source of morality? It's deeper. Is obedience a virtue, or just the first step toward evil in uniform? Moral luck. You're judged for outcomes you didn't control. Picture this. Two men drive home drunk, same road, same time, same blood alcohol level. One gets home safely, the other hits a child crossing the street. One becomes a father who made a mistake. The other becomes a killer. But what if the only difference was luck? This is the disturbing problem of moral luck, the idea that we often judge people's morality based not on what they chose, but on what happened next. Even when what happened was out of their control, it seems wrong. We're taught that morality is about intentions, that you're responsible for your choices, not for fate. But real life doesn't work that way. And the deeper you look, the more morality starts to feel like a lottery. The term moral luck was made famous by philosopher Thomas Nagel, who asked a simple but devastating question: how can we be morally judged for things that depend on factors beyond our control? Let's go back to the drunk drivers. They made the same decision, but only one lives with guilt, with trial, with prison, because a child happened to be there. That wasn't a choice, that was chance. But chance becomes fate, and fate becomes judgment. Take it further. Two soldiers fight in war. One never sees combat. The other kills 3 men in a confused firefight. Same enlistment, same uniform, but only one carries the moral weight of blood. Or think about politicians. A leader makes an economic gamble. If it works, they're a visionary. If it fails, they're a fool. Or worse, a criminal. Same policy, same logic, different outcomes, different morality. In law, we try to account for this. We say, you intended harm, you're guilty. or it was an accident. You're not, but it's not that simple. Imagine a parent who leaves their child in the car for 2 minutes to grab milk. Most of the time, nothing happens. But once in a while, the child dies. Now imagine the exact same parent, the same action, but it's cloudy, not sunny. No harm, no guilt. The difference between a mistake and a tragedy is sometimes just the temperature. This is the horror of moral luck, because it suggests that morality, the thing we think is most sacred, most rational, most fair, is built on circumstances no one can control. It gets worse. Nagel identifies 4 kinds of moral luck. Resultant luck, what happens as a result of your action. Circumstantial luck, the situations you find yourself in. Constitutive luck, the kind of person you are. Causal luck, the background causes that led you to this moment. Let's break these down. Resultant luck is what we've already seen. You throw a punch in a bar fight. If they duck, you're angry. If they fall and die, you're a murderer. Circumstantial luck is the luck of situation. If you were born in Nazi Germany, would you have resisted, or would you have worn the uniform? Some people are never tested. Others are born into fire. Do we blame the ones who fail, or praise the ones who never had to? Constitutive luck is perhaps the most disturbing. You are not self-made. Your temperament, your anxiety, your impulses, your empathy, all shaped by genes, childhood, trauma, hormones. If someone is born with a violent temper, are they evil or just unlucky? And then there's causal luck, the entire chain of events that brought you here. Your culture, your parents, your first heartbreak, the teacher who hated you, the bus you missed, the friend who called at the right time. You didn't choose those things, but they shaped your choices. So are your choices really yours? Some philosophers say moral luck shatters the idea of moral responsibility altogether. If you can't control who you are or what happens when you act, then how can anyone be blamed? Others argue that without judgment, there's no morality at all. Because we don't judge the world we wish for. We judge the world we see. But here's the quiet horror. If your morality depends on outcomes, and outcomes depend on luck, then maybe you're only innocent because no one died. Kant's noumena. You'll never know the real world. Imagine spending your entire life inside a high-tech VR headset. The headset translates light, sound, texture, and space into sensory experiences. You move through virtual forests, touch warm sunlight, hear music echo through a digital cathedral. Everything feels real, but no matter how advanced the headset, you never experience the world outside the headset, only its filtered translation. This, in essence, is Immanuel Kant's theory of the noumenon, the thing in itself, and it's one of the most quietly terrifying ideas in Western philosophy. Kant believed that the human mind doesn't passively receive the world. It structures it. Space, time, causality. These aren't properties of the external world. They are built-in lenses of the human mind, ways we process raw input. In other words, reality doesn't appear to us, it's constructed for us by the machinery of perception. So what's behind the veil? Kant called it the noumenon, the reality that exists independently of any observer. But here's the catch. You will never experience it. Ever. The moment reality reaches you, it's already distorted by your cognitive interface. Just like a VR user can't touch the server room, you will never escape your own perception. This wasn't just a theory, it was a philosophical rupture. Before Kant, most thinkers assumed we were discovering the world. After Kant, philosophers realized we might only ever be discovering our own mind's projection of the world. And this leads to a horrifying implication. The real world could be nothing like what you think. Color, shape, distance. They could all be illusions, the way a blind person might learn to see through echolocation, building a world of sound rather than light. Modern science offers eerie support. We now know that your eyes take in fragmented, upside-down data. Your brain color corrects, aligns, and stitches it together. Even more bizarre, neuroscientists have found that hallucinations and reality often use the same neural pathways. Your perception of a coffee cup is just a hallucination that happens to be stable. Kant's warning is existential, not just intellectual. He's telling you, you are forever trapped inside your own interface. The world behind the screen? You'll never touch it, never know it, never even know how wrong you might be. You are not a camera. You are a filter, a prison, and reality is on the outside, screaming through a wall you'll never break. The experience machine. If happiness can be simulated, do morals even matter? Nozick. Imagine this. You're offered a choice. Step into a machine that simulates your perfect life. You won't know it's fake. You'll feel love, success, pleasure, fulfillment. You'll believe it's all real, forever. Would you plug in? This thought experiment, the experience machine, was proposed by philosopher Robert Nozick in 1974. He wasn't trying to sell you virtual reality. He was asking, is happiness still valuable if it's based on a lie? Most people say no. They hesitate. Even if the feelings are perfect, they want their lives to be real. But why? If experience is all that matters, and the machine gives you perfect experience, then what's the problem? The fact that most people reject the machine reveals something deeper. Nozick argued, we want to be certain kinds of people, not just feel like them. We want to do things, not just simulate them, to struggle, to fail, to earn meaning. But here's the twist. In real life, we already live in partial experience machines. Social media, curated identities, filtered joy, simulated connection, drugs, engineered highs, bliss without meaning, even memory. Unreliable, easily distorted, shaped to comfort us. We reject the machine in theory, but often chase it in practice. And if you're honest, how much of your life is chosen for truth versus comfort? Think of someone in a happy relationship based on a lie. They're not aware they're being cheated on. They feel loved, safe, fulfilled. Is their happiness real? Now imagine someone else who knows the truth and suffers for it, who has the better life. The machine forces us to confront this. Do we care more about truth or the feeling of truth? And if you say, well, I'd want both, the machine says, you don't get both. Choose, because maybe reality isn't where happiness lives. Maybe truth is cold and the lie is warm. So, would you plug in? And if you wouldn't, why are you already halfway there? The trolley problem. Would you kill one innocent to save 5? There's a train. It's speeding toward 5 workers on the tracks. You're standing next to a switch. If you pull it, the trolley will divert onto a side track where 1 person is standing. You can do nothing and let 5 die, or pull the lever and kill 1. What do you do? This is the famous trolley problem, first introduced by philosopher Philippa Foot in 1967. It's been called the most discussed moral dilemma in modern ethics. Simple setup, deep implications. On the surface, the math is easy. Save 5. Sacrifice 1. But then it gets worse. What if you're not pulling a lever, but pushing a man off a bridge to stop the train? Same result. 1 dies, 5 live, but now it feels different. Why? This is what philosopher Judith Jarvis Thomson explored. She noticed we react more harshly when harm feels intentional or personal, even if the outcome is identical. Now imagine this, that 1 person on the track is your child, or someone famous, or a criminal. The 5 are strangers, or elderly, or sleeping. Does your answer change? It probably does. That's what makes the trolley problem so disturbing. It strips away comfort. It forces you to choose when every option is wrong. It reveals the hidden biases in our moral reasoning, our emotional favoritism, tribal instincts, and personal stakes. And this isn't just a classroom thought experiment. In 2016, the creators of self-driving cars faced this dilemma in real life. If a crash is unavoidable, should the car swerve to hit 1 person and save 5 pedestrians? What if the one is the owner of the car? Suddenly, it's no longer about ethics. It's about who gets to write the algorithm. And if we can't agree on a moral answer, how do we code it? The trolley problem exposes the split between two moral systems. Polar utilitarianism says, maximize good outcomes, save more lives. Deontological ethics like Kant says, never use someone as a means to an end. The problem is, they contradict each other, and you're left choosing between clean hands and fewer graves. So here's the truth. There is no right answer. Just the horrifying realization that morality, when pushed far enough, always demands a sacrifice. And in that moment, are you still sure you're the kind of person who would pull the lever? The utility monster, when fairness becomes evil. Imagine this. There's a creature. It feels pleasure 10 times more intensely than any human. One cookie to you is a mild treat. One cookie to the creature is euphoria. Now imagine you have 10 cookies. Who should get them? You or the creature? According to strict utilitarian logic, give all the cookies to the monster because it extracts more pleasure per unit than you do. And if morality is about maximizing happiness, the answer is obvious, but it's also horrifying. This is the utility monster, a thought experiment proposed by philosopher Robert Nozick in 1974 as a critique of utilitarianism. It's not just about dessert, it's about ethics, and what happens when you take fairness seriously but define it by feelings instead of people. Imagine this creature lives in your town. Every dollar you earn gives you mild contentment, but that same dollar, if given to the monster, produces transcendent joy. By utilitarian logic, you should give it everything: your food, your home, your child's college fund. You should starve for its happiness. Because in the math of utilitarianism, your suffering is a bargain compared to its bliss. Now zoom out. What if this monster isn't fictional? What if in real life, some people really do feel more deeply? More pleasure, more pain. Should they get more rights? More food? More say? Or worse, what if you're the one who feels less? Are you worth less? Nozick's point wasn't that monsters are real. It was that utilitarianism, when followed all the way, ignores equality. It treats people like vessels. Whoever fills the most joy wins, even if the rest are crushed. And in this world, fairness isn't giving everyone a slice. It's giving everything to the one who feels the most. Think about real-world echoes. The talented CEO is worth 300 workers. The celebrity's sadness matters more than a refugee's. Society caters to those who shout the loudest because their displeasure weighs more. Utilitarianism starts with kindness, but it can end with cruelty in the name of arithmetic. So next time someone says morality is about maximizing happiness, ask who gets to feel it and who gets erased to make the math work. Hard determinism. You have no free will at all. Spinoza, Laplace. Picture this. A man commits murder. Not in a rage. Not by accident. Just does it. Now imagine this. His childhood was violent. His brain scans show abnormalities. His impulse control was shaped by trauma, genes, and exposure to lead. So here's the question. Did he choose this, or did every atom in the universe lead him there? Welcome to hard determinism. The idea that free will is an illusion, and that every thought, decision, and twitch of your finger was already set in motion by prior causes. You didn't choose your DNA. You didn't choose your upbringing. You didn't choose your culture, your fears, your instincts. So what did you choose? This idea dates back centuries, but it became sharp and terrifying through thinkers like Baruch Spinoza and Pierre-Simon Laplace. Laplace imagined a mind, later called Laplace's demon, that knew the exact position and motion of every particle in the universe. With perfect knowledge, this being could predict the future with total accuracy. If everything obeys physical laws, and we are made of atoms, then we are machines. And choice is just the feeling we have when we don't know the calculation. Hard determinists argue this isn't just theory, it's physics. You think you decided to eat the cookie? Neuroscience shows your brain made the decision milliseconds before you became aware of it. You think you fell in love? Maybe your hormones liked your smell. Maybe your childhood made you crave that type of validation. So what's left? If every decision is the result of cause and effect chains you didn't choose, then what are you but a very polite puppet? People resist this because if there's no free will, what happens to morality? To guilt? To praise? To blame? If a killer had no real choice, should he be punished? Hard determinists say yes, but not for justice. For protection, rehabilitation, prevention, not because he's evil, because he's dangerous software. It's cold, it's horrifying, but it might be true. Because in the end, if you trace every action backwards, to neurons, to upbringing, to events before you were born, you find a chain that never asked you for permission. So here's the final question. Are you living your life? Or just watching it play out, frame by frame, like a film you mistake for a mirror? Libertarian free will. Only irrationality can save freedom. You're standing at a crossroads. Left or right, no one's watching. No pressure, no reward, just you and the choice. You pause, because deep down, you feel it. This moment matters. It's you, choosing. And nothing, not fate, not physics, is pulling the strings. This is what libertarian free will tries to defend, the raw, untamed possibility that you could have done otherwise, that your choice wasn't predetermined, that you are, in some deep metaphysical sense, the origin of your own actions. But this comes at a cost. Libertarianism in philosophy isn't about politics, it's about radical freedom. It says, you are not a machine, you are not a puppet, you are an agent, uncaused by anything else. This sounds empowering until you ask, then where do your decisions come from? If not from your past, your biology, your desires, then from what? The philosopher Roderick Chisholm called it agent causation. You don't act because of prior causes. You act because you cause yourself to act. But critics push back. Isn't that just saying, it happens because it happens? Isn't that randomness dressed up as choice? Imagine you're flipping a mental coin between cake and fruit. If nothing determines the outcome, isn't it just chaos? And if it is determined, was it ever truly yours? This is the dilemma. Either your actions are caused and not truly free, or uncaused and meaningless. Some libertarians embrace the absurd. They argue that true freedom is irrational, that choosing against reason, even against your own interest, is the only real proof that you are free. Imagine a soldier who runs into gunfire to save a stranger. Logically, he shouldn't, but he does. Not because he was programmed or calculated utility, but because in that moment, he chose something unexplainable, something human. Libertarian free will says, maybe that's the soul. Not predictable, not programmable, just yours. But here's the cost. 1. To keep that freedom, you must live in a universe that can't explain you. So ask yourself, do you really want to be free? If freedom means being irrational, unprovable, and forever alone in your choices. The predictability paradox. If your choices are knowable, are they choices? Imagine this. You walk into an ice cream shop. You stand in front of the counter thinking, vanilla or chocolate. You weigh your options, consider your mood, and then you pick chocolate. But outside the shop, a neuroscientist smiles. She predicted your choice 5 seconds before you made it by watching your brain. In 2008, researchers using fMRI scans found that human decisions could be predicted up to 7 seconds before participants became consciously aware of choosing. The brain knew before you did, which leads to a disturbing question. If your choices are predictable, are they really choices? This is the predictability paradox, where the better we understand your behavior, the harder it is to believe in your freedom. Think of weather. We don't say the storm decided to form. We just forecast it based on conditions. What if the same is true for you? Your upbringing, stress levels, glucose levels, childhood memories, how well you slept, all become inputs, and given enough data, your next move could be mathematically inevitable. Advertisers already bet on it. Algorithms predict what video you'll click, what product you'll buy, what political opinion you'll share. And most of the time, they're right. Some philosophers say, that's fine. Being predictable doesn't mean being unfree. A trustworthy person acts consistently. That doesn't make them a robot, just reliable. But others push back. If every choice can be reduced to patterns, then the feeling of freedom is just an illusion of ignorance. You feel free only because you don't see the strings. Now imagine a perfect predictor, an AI that knows you better than you do. It texts you before you act. Hey, you're about to call your ex. Don't. You hadn't even reached for the phone yet. Do you still believe you're the one deciding? Here's the final twist. Even doubt, even resisting the prediction, might itself have been predicted. Pre-calculated rebellion. So you pull away from the system, but the system already accounted for that. Which leaves you with the chilling thought, maybe freedom isn't broken by force, but by understanding, and the more we learn about the mind, the less room is left for you. Moral responsibility. Without free will, should we punish puppets? A man steals food. Another assaults a stranger. A third commits murder. In court, we ask, were they sane? Were they coerced? Did they choose? But what if no one ever truly chooses? If determinism is true, then every action, even the worst, was caused by a chain of events stretching back before birth. Genes, trauma, chemicals, childhood, accidents, none of it chosen. So here's the haunting question. If no one is free, can anyone be guilty? This is the heart of the moral responsibility dilemma. If we have no free will, if we're just machines with memories, then punishment becomes morally questionable. Take the case of Charles Whitman, the 1966 Texas Tower shooter. After killing 16 people, an autopsy revealed a brain tumor pressing on his amygdala, the part of the brain that regulates fear and aggression. Was he evil or broken? Or consider Leopold and Loeb, the teenage murderers who killed for thrill. Their lawyer, Clarence Darrow, argued not for innocence, but for understanding. I know that every one of you who has studied the science of the mind knows that people act from causes, and they are not to blame. The jury spared their lives. But this raises a paradox. If people aren't truly to blame, do we let them go? Of course not. We still imprison, restrain, protect society. But the reason changes, not retribution, but prevention. Not punishment, but quarantine. You don't hate a tornado. You just get out of its way. Some argue this is the future of justice. No more blame, just behavioral correction. No moral outrage, just risk management. But something feels lost. We want to believe in accountability, in choosing to do right, in condemning those who choose evil. If morality survives without free will, it's only by shifting its foundations from desert to danger, and that's a hard pill to swallow. Because if your neighbor hurts you and you're told he had no real choice, can you still look him in the eye and say, I forgive you? Or worse, you deserve this. And if no one ever truly chooses, is justice still justice, or just a managed illusion for a species afraid of its programming? Brain over body, your gut made the choice before you did. You think you just made a decision. You paused, reflected, chose. But science says, maybe you didn't. In 1983, neuroscientist Benjamin Libet ran a now infamous experiment. Participants were told to flex their wrist whenever they felt like it, and to note the exact moment they consciously decided to move. But Libet also measured brain activity. And what he found was disturbing. The brain began preparing for movement a full 350 milliseconds before the person reported deciding. In other words, your brain acts before you do. This finding has been replicated and debated for decades. But the core message remains. Consciousness is late to the party. It feels like you make the choice. But your neural machinery already fired the starting gun, and the decision was just your mind catching up, spinning a story to explain what already happened. Think about a time you lashed out in anger. You later say, "I didn't mean it." But the truth might be worse. You didn't even choose it. You just watched it happen from the inside. Even gut feelings, that eerie sense of right or wrong, often stem from the enteric nervous system, a vast network of neurons in your intestines, sometimes called the second brain. It influences anxiety, intuition, even decision-making. So who's running the show? The rational mind, or a swarm of silent processes beneath awareness? Think of a courtroom. A defendant claims he had no control. His brain made him do it. Sounds like a lie, until it's not. Brain tumors, epilepsy, chemical imbalances, all can trigger behavior without conscious control. There are documented cases of people developing compulsions or violent urges, only to later discover growths in their prefrontal cortex. Remove the tumor, and the urges vanish. Were they ever theirs to begin with? This isn't just neuroscience. It's an attack on moral identity, on the idea that there's a self steering the body. Because if your body moves before you decide, and your gut, your chemistry, your reflexes all beat you to the punch, then what is you exactly? Maybe you're not the captain. Maybe you're just the narrator. And your story of choice is a post hoc illusion told by the part of the brain that hates admitting how little control it has. So next time you make a decision, stop and ask, did you really decide that? Or did something inside you just let you think you did? Sartre's radical freedom. You are 100% responsible for everything. You're standing in front of a mirror. You don't like what you see. You blame your job, your family, your childhood, the world. But philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre would say, no, this is all you. You chose this, or chose not to choose. And that is still a choice. Sartre's view of freedom isn't comforting. It's not about liberty or rights. It's not about free speech or free will in a philosophical loophole. It's something far more disturbing. You are condemned to be free. That's his phrase. Condemned. Because for Sartre, freedom isn't a gift, it's a curse. Why? Because if you're free, truly free, then you have no excuses. Ever. No God to blame. No nature to hide behind. No deterministic machinery to explain your failure. Every moment of your life is a decision to act or to remain passive, to love, to lie, to speak, to stay silent. Even denial is a form of choice. There's a story Sartre tells in Existentialism is a Humanism about a young man in Nazi-occupied France. He has a choice: stay with his sick mother who depends on him, or join the resistance and fight for his country. There's no rule book, no objective answer, just anguish. Sartre says, man is nothing else but what he makes of himself. No cosmic meaning, no divine plan, only the meaning you invent. And if you don't invent it, you've still made a choice. Even your identity is not fixed. If you say, that's just who I am, Sartre would scoff. He called that bad faith. The lie we tell ourselves to avoid the weight of freedom. The moment you say, I can't change, you've already refused to take responsibility. Freedom means you are never just your job, never just your past, never just your trauma. You are always becoming, and you're the only one doing it. Which sounds empowering until you realize that every failure, every regret, every unlived dream is yours. There's no one else to blame. So next time you say, I had no choice, remember Sartre and ask yourself, or did I just choose not to choose and pretend that was different? Determinism and crime. What if no one is truly guilty? Imagine this. A man robs a store. He's caught, tried, convicted. The judge calls him evil. The news calls him a monster. But what if we rewound his life? His mother was abusive. His father abandoned him. He grew up poor, hungry, traumatized. At age 6, he stole bread. At 10, he was beaten for crying. At 13, he joined a gang for protection. Now fast forward, same man, same crime. But does he deserve blame? This is the moral nightmare at the intersection of determinism and justice. If human behavior is caused by genes, trauma, brain chemistry, social environment, then how can anyone be truly guilty? The legal system depends on responsibility. Juries ask, did he choose this? But what if choice is just the story we tell ourselves about behavior we can't explain? Determinism says, every action is the result of prior causes. If you trace the criminal's life far enough, you'll find reasons, not evil. Even modern neuroscience backs this up. Studies show that damage to the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for judgment and impulse control, can turn calm people violent. Tumors, strokes, even parasites like Toxoplasma gondii can subtly alter human behavior, and yet we still punish. Why? Some say it's practical. We lock people up to protect others, reform them, deter others. But that's not how society talks. We call them evil. We demand punishment. We tell ourselves they deserve it. That's retribution, not prevention. And determinism says retribution is an illusion, a primal urge for revenge dressed up in robes and gavels. Imagine punishing a tornado or blaming a lion for killing a gazelle. That's what guilt looks like in a deterministic universe, an outdated concept, a leftover myth. And yet, we resist this. Because if no one is truly guilty, then no one is truly innocent either. Every act of kindness is caused. Every hero is an accident of nature and nurture. And without guilt, there is no virtue. So we cling to blame, not because it's fair, but because it's the only thing holding morality together. Still, determinism whispers, what if your worst act was never a choice at all, just a tragic chain reaction in a machine you didn't build? The problem of evil. If God is good, why is there suffering? A child dies in agony. Cancer. No fault, no sin, just random, unbearable pain. Now look upward and ask, if there is a God and he is good, how could he allow this? This is the problem of evil, one of the oldest and most disturbing questions in philosophy of religion. It's not a question of belief, it's a question of logic. If God is all-powerful, he could stop suffering. If God is all good, he would want to. Suffering exists. So, either he can't, or he won't, or he isn't there at all. The ancient Greek philosopher Epicurus posed it this way over 2,000 years ago. Is God willing to prevent evil, but not able? Then he is not omnipotent. Is he able, but not willing? Then he is malevolent. And the problem hasn't gone away. After the Holocaust, Jewish philosopher Eliezer Berkovitz asked how God could stay silent while children were led to gas chambers. After every earthquake, flood, or genocide, the same question returns. Why would a good God allow such horror? Theologians have tried to answer. Some say it's free will, that God allows evil because without choice, we'd be robots. But this doesn't explain natural evil, disease, disaster, birth defects. Things no human chose. Others say it's a test. Suffering builds character, deepens faith. But couldn't an all-wise God test us in gentler ways? What possible lesson is worth a baby's death? Some fall back on mystery. God works in ways we can't understand. But if goodness becomes indistinguishable from cruelty, can we still call it good? In Dostoevsky's The Brothers Karamazov, the character even says he could accept suffering, but not the suffering of children. He says, I respectfully return the ticket to any heaven that demands that price. And that's the haunting power of the problem of evil. It's not just intellectual, it's emotional, visceral. It strikes at the heart of trust, because if God is good, he should protect the innocent. If he doesn't, what does that say about the architect of the universe? And if there is no architect at all, is that a comfort, or just the silence we tell ourselves not to hear? Atheism as moral clarity. Morality doesn't need God. Russell, Camus. What if good and evil exist without heaven or hell? No judge, no throne, no divine reward, just us. Deciding. This is the heart of atheistic moral clarity, the idea that morality doesn't need God, that in fact removing God might make morality clearer, not more confusing. In 1927, philosopher Bertrand Russell stood before an audience and gave his famous speech, Why I Am Not a Christian. He said bluntly that belief in God was not needed for ethics. If anything, it could get in the way. Why? Because religious morality often demands obedience, not understanding. You don't ask why something is right. You obey because it's written, or because you're afraid not to. Russell asked, Do you really think you'd be unable to tell murder is wrong without being told by a divine being? If your compassion evaporates without threats, was it morality? Or just compliance? Atheist thinkers like Albert Camus took it further. In a godless universe, he said, we are radically responsible for what we do. There is no cosmic referee to clean up our mistakes, so our choices and their consequences are entirely ours. That's not freedom, that's a burden. In The Plague, Camus writes about a doctor who fights a deadly epidemic, not because he believes in heaven, but because people are suffering here, now, in front of him. No theology, no reward, just human decency without appeal to the sky. And perhaps that's the quiet power of atheistic morality. You help others not because you'll be punished if you don't, but because they're in pain, and you know what pain feels like. Some religious critics argue that atheism leads to nihilism. No God, no rules, just chaos. But this misunderstands the atheist's clarity. They say, if there is no afterlife, then this is all we have. One fragile, fleeting chance. And that makes morality more urgent, not less. Because there are no do-overs, no final judgment, only the world we build together, moment by moment, action by action. So ask yourself, if no one were watching, no God, no karma, no hellfire or heaven, would you still be good? And if you would, isn't that real morality? God as projection. He's just a mirror of human needs. Feuerbach. Imagine you're cold, afraid, and powerless. You look up at the sky and imagine someone who isn't, someone who sees everything, knows everything, loves unconditionally, punishes evil, answers prayers. But what if this being, this God, isn't real at all? What if it's just you, projected outward? That's the unsettling claim of Ludwig Feuerbach, a 19th-century German philosopher who argued that God is nothing but humanity turned inside out, an idealized reflection of our deepest longings, fears, and needs. In his 1841 book, The Essence of Christianity, Feuerbach didn't simply attack religion, he psychoanalyzed it. He claimed that every quality we attribute to God, love, justice, wisdom, immortality, is actually a human quality, magnified and purified until it becomes something divine. What man wishes to be but is not, he makes his God. We want to be loved unconditionally, so we imagine a God who does. We want justice in a world of injustice, so we invent divine judgment. We fear death, so we imagine an afterlife. We feel powerless, so we dream of someone who isn't. To Feuerbach, theology is anthropology. When we worship, we're not reaching out to something higher, we're just staring into a polished mirror. But we've forgotten that it's a mirror. We call it God. This wasn't just abstract philosophy. Feuerbach's critique cut deep. It implied that entire religious traditions are mass self-deception, comforting delusions that prevent us from facing the cold, meaningless world as it really is. Marx was deeply influenced by this. He took Feuerbach's idea further. If God is a projection, then religion is a social opiate, a tool to pacify the masses. Nietzsche followed next. If we've created God in our image, then killing that image means we are now responsible for meaning, morality, and truth. But Feuerbach's idea is more than just an attack. It's also a plea. Recognize that everything you admired in your gods already exists in you. Compassion, justice, wisdom, they were never floating in heaven. They were always your potential. But that means there is no divine safety net, no omnipotent Father watching over you, only your own trembling hand in the dark. And perhaps for many, that's the most terrifying idea of all. Mysticism versus rationality. Should truth be logical or felt? Close your eyes, breathe in, and imagine you just know something is true. Not because you proved it, not because it's logical, but because you felt it with every fiber of your being. Mysticism has always stood at war with philosophy. While philosophers build truths with definitions and arguments, mystics dissolve words entirely, claiming that ultimate truth can't be spoken, only experienced. In the 13th century, the Christian mystic Meister Eckhart wrote of God as a presence beyond all categories, beyond good or being or person. To reach him, Eckhart said, you must empty the self. Let go of identity. Let go of language. What's left is silence. And in that silence, truth. Compare this to philosophers like Descartes, who began his philosophy with total doubt. He wanted clarity, certainty, logic. If it couldn't be proven step by step, it wasn't worthy of belief. But mystics say, logic is too small. You can dissect a candle endlessly, but that tells you nothing about what it feels like to sit in candlelight. Take the case of Rumi, the 13th century Sufi poet. His writings are ecstatic, fevered, word-drunk, but he never tries to prove the divine. Instead, he dances around it. His verses suggest that truth is like love or music, something you enter, not something you analyze. Western philosophers, especially during the Enlightenment, treated mysticism like a fever dream, irrational, vague, emotionally manipulative. And to be fair, mysticism often collapses into vague nonsense. People claim to experience oneness, energy, the infinite, but offer no way to distinguish deep insight from delusion. Yet modern neuroscience complicates things. Under fMRI scans, mystics in deep meditation, Buddhist monks, Carmelite nuns, even psychedelic users, show activity in parts of the brain associated with self-dissolution. They report losing the boundary between me and everything else. A feeling of unity, of truth without words. So the dilemma remains, should truth be logical or lived? Is a mystical experience a window into something real or just a trick of brain chemistry? If you can't explain it, should you trust it? And if you only trust what you can explain, what truths might you be too small to ever grasp? Blasphemy as philosophy. Questioning God is often the start of real thought. At some point in your life, someone probably told you not to ask certain questions. Don't question the sacred. Don't doubt the divine. Don't play with fire. But the history of philosophy is exactly that, a long, flaming archive of humans doing the one thing they were warned not to, asking if the gods are real and if they're worthy. Take Socrates. He was executed in 399 BCE, officially for corrupting the youth and impiety. In reality, he taught people to ask uncomfortable questions, including about the gods of Athens. In Plato's dialogues, Socrates never claims to know anything. He just keeps asking, again and again, what justice is, what virtue is, what piety means. And the more people answered, the more confused they got. To the city, this wasn't philosophy. It was dangerous heresy. In medieval Europe, questioning God could get you burned alive. In the 13th century, the philosopher Giordano Bruno proposed that the universe was infinite, that stars were suns with their own planets, and that divinity might not be limited to Earth. For this, he was arrested, tortured, and eventually incinerated in Rome. Blasphemy throughout history wasn't just a religious crime, it was a political one. Because questioning God often means questioning the institutions that claim to speak in his name. To say, maybe God isn't like that, was to say, maybe the priests are wrong. Or worse, maybe the entire social order is built on a fragile story. But the blasphemers weren't always atheists. Søren Kierkegaard, a devout Christian, attacked the Danish church for turning religion into performance. He believed true faith required absurdity, believing not what's reasonable but what's impossible. Nietzsche, on the other hand, declared God dead, not to celebrate it, but to warn what happens when belief collapses and nothing takes its place. So here's the disturbing truth. Philosophy begins when certainty ends. When you stop repeating what you were told and start asking what's actually true, no matter the cost. Sometimes the first philosophical act isn't to answer a question, it's to ask one that's forbidden, and that's what blasphemy really is. The refusal to let someone else define your limits. The Teletransporter Problem. If you're copied, are you still alive? Imagine a machine that scans your entire body, every atom, every neural connection, then destroys it, and instantly reconstructs you on Mars, atom by atom, perfectly. Would you step in? The you that appears on Mars looks, talks, and thinks exactly like you. Same memories, same quirks, same anxieties. Your friends wouldn't notice a difference. But here's the question. Is that still you, or did you just die in a fancy disintegration booth? This is the teletransporter problem, and it's not just sci-fi. It's a real philosophical nightmare that tears open the illusion of personal identity. Because if continuity of memory and personality is what defines you, then the copy on Mars is you. But if physical continuity, the persistence of your body, matters, then you're dead and a stranger now walks in your shoes. Let's twist the knife further. Suppose the machine malfunctions. It scans you, sends the copy to Mars, but doesn't destroy the original. Now there are two of you, identical but separate. One stays on Earth, the other starts a new life on Mars. Who gets your bank account? Who's responsible for your past crimes? Can your partner accuse you of cheating with yourself? The dilemma reveals that our sense of a single, continuous self doesn't hold up under pressure. It's not just teleportation. Consider people who survive traumatic brain injury, waking up with completely different personalities. Or those with severe Alzheimer's, are they still the person they once were? If identity is just a pattern of information, a narrative told by memory, then every time you sleep and wake, every time your cells regenerate, you're not quite the same person. Continuity is a trick, a performance your brain puts on so you don't panic every morning. The teletransporter doesn't kill you. It just removes the lie that you were ever one person to begin with. Anatta, no self. The self is an illusion, Buddhism. There's a voice in your head that says, I am me, a thread of consciousness that feels like it stretches from childhood to now. But Buddhism says that's a lie, not just a mistake, a hallucination. The doctrine is called anatta, or no self. According to it, what we call the self is nothing more than a bundle of sensations, thoughts, and experiences held loosely together by habit and memory. There is no hidden soul, no unchanging core. You are not the thing observing your life. You are the process itself. It's disturbing if you really sit with it. In Buddhist texts, the Buddha compared the self to a chariot. Take away the wheels, the axles, the seat. Where is the chariot? There never was a thing called chariot, apart from its parts. Just so, take away your sensations, your thoughts, your body, your memories. What's left to call you? Nothing. Modern neuroscience has caught up to this idea in horrifying detail. Split brain experiments, where the brain's hemispheres are surgically separated, show two consciousnesses in one body, each with different preferences, different beliefs. One hemisphere can believe in God, while the other doesn't. Which one is you? Or take dissociative identity disorder, multiple selves, each with different handwriting, voices, and memories, cohabiting one skull. If that doesn't shake your idea of a unified self, nothing will. Now imagine the implications. If there is no self, not really, then who suffers? Who acts? Who dies? Anatta isn't nihilism. It's meant to be liberating. If the self is an illusion, then clinging to it causes suffering. The Buddha taught that by letting go of this false center, we can escape the wheel of suffering altogether. But the path to that realization isn't peaceful. It's terrifying, because letting go of self isn't like throwing away a coat. It's like realizing there was no body wearing the coat in the first place. And if there's no self, just a cascade of mental events playing out moment by moment, then who exactly is reading this sentence? That silence you feel? That's what's left when the illusion stops talking. Qualia. You can never know what red feels like to me. You and I both know what the color red is, right? Apples, fire trucks, blood. Easy. But here's the question. Does your red feel like my red? Or do you experience something completely alien, a color I've never seen, but you've learned to call red because that's the label everyone uses? Welcome to the philosophical minefield of qualia, the raw, subjective feel of conscious experience. It's not about what you see, but what it's like to see it. Not just a rose is red, but this is how my mind experiences red. Qualia is the taste of chocolate, the burn of shame, the hum of anxiety. It's the stuff that doesn't show up on a brain scan. You can measure light hitting the retina, neurons firing, speech produced, but you can't measure the experience itself. This is why philosophers like Thomas Nagel ask, what is it like to be a bat? You can study sonar all day long, but you will never know the experience of navigating the world through echoes, unless you are one, and even then, you'd only know your version of it. Here's the horror. Even if someone could plug into your brain, feel your emotions, see your memories, they'd still only be seeing them through their own lens. Your sadness might feel like drowning. Theirs might feel like burning. They'll never know. Neither will you. This makes empathy, real empathy, fundamentally limited. We pretend to understand each other, but we're really just guessing based on facial expressions, patterns, words. It's like reading subtitles for a movie we can't actually hear. Qualia is what makes you you, and yet it traps you inside your own skull. You might smile while dying inside, or cry even when feeling nothing at all. To the outside world, it looks the same. The deeper implication: no one can ever confirm if anyone else is truly conscious. Not their lover, not their child, not their God. You are alone in your experience, utterly, inescapably alone. And the red you think you know may not be red at all. Consciousness as emergent trickery, a side effect of meat computing. Imagine a pile of sand. Now imagine adding one grain at a time. At what point does it become a sand castle? When does structure emerge from chaos? That's how some philosophers and neuroscientists think your mind works. Your consciousness, your inner voice, your identity, your experience of being you might not be a soul or a spirit or anything remotely special. It might just be what happens when a certain number of meat circuits light up in the right way. A side effect, a glitch, an illusion. This is the emergent theory of consciousness. It says that the brain doesn't contain consciousness. It doesn't even produce it like a machine makes a product. It becomes consciousness when complexity reaches a critical threshold. Just like a city emerges from buildings and roads and traffic, but isn't contained in any one of them. Think of it like this. No neuron knows who you are. None of your brain cells contain a memory of your first kiss. But somehow, together, they generate the illusion of memory, the illusion of continuity, the illusion of continuity. Now here's the dark twist. If consciousness is just an emergent property of complexity, it can vanish without you noticing. It can be turned off, partially split, or malfunction, as seen in dissociative identity disorder, anesthesia awareness, or even certain meditation states where people report watching their own thoughts without a self. There's no central self, no CEO in the skull, just competing signals, associations, routines. The mind is not a captain piloting the ship. It is the ship creaking as it floats. This also opens up terrifying questions. Could a simulation be conscious if it's complex enough? Could the internet one day wake up? Could consciousness emerge inside a massive server farm and never know it isn't human? Worse, if your self is a side effect, what happens when that side effect stops being useful? Would evolution erase it? Could we be the last generation to need the illusion of self-awareness? You are not a soul in a machine. You are a machine that thinks it has a soul. And that trick is the most dangerous magic ever performed. Solipsism. Maybe you're the only conscious being. Imagine waking up tomorrow and truly realizing that everyone you've ever known is just part of your dream. They move, talk, laugh, cry, but behind their eyes, nothing, no thoughts, no awareness, just empty puppets performing for you. Welcome to solipsism, the philosophical idea that only your own mind is certain to exist. It's not just a thought experiment, it's a trapdoor at the center of all consciousness, because no matter how much you believe others are real, you can never prove it. You experience your sensations, your thoughts, but their minds, their inner lives. You've never touched them. You only observe behavior. A child could believe their stuffed animal has feelings. We believe our friends do. What's the difference? Imagine you're being watched, not by a camera, but by the very structure of the world. What if everything, your partner's smile, your mother's voice, your dog's excited bark, is part of an elaborate show, not a conspiracy by humans, a cosmic Truman Show orchestrated by God? A computer? Your own dreaming brain? The philosopher Descartes wondered about this in the 1600s. He asked, what if there's an evil demon, unimaginably powerful, deceiving you about everything, the world, people, even math? He tried to find something that couldn't be faked. His answer? I think, therefore I am. That's it. The thinking self was the only certainty. Everything else, family, earth, even his own body, could be lies. Now imagine living like that. The horror of solipsism isn't that it's false. It's that it might be true, and there's nothing you can do about it. Think of people with Cotard's delusion who believe they're dead, or those with schizophrenia who believe their thoughts are broadcast. They're trapped in worlds where reality feels real, but isn't. Solipsism is a healthier cousin of those disorders. Still functional, still reasoning, but isolated. And the scariest part, solipsism can't be disproven. Even this voice you're hearing, could be part of your illusion, just a narrative you invented to pass the time. So here's the real question. If you're alone in the universe, does it even matter? Would kindness still be worth it? Would cruelty be consequence-free? Or would you finally admit that meaning, morality, and love were always just ways of keeping the loneliness quiet? You'll never know. Only you are here to ask. Free will as brain lag. You act before you choose. In 1983, a neuroscientist named Benjamin Libet hooked people up to EEG machines and asked them to perform the simplest task, flick their wrist whenever they felt like it. Just a spontaneous movement. No commands, no schedule, just pure, free choice. Or so it seemed. Libet also told them to watch a clock with a spinning dot and report the exact moment they decided to flick. Then he compared the moment of conscious intention to the electrical activity in their brain, and what he found was disturbing. The brain's motor regions began firing about 350 milliseconds before the person consciously decided to act. Their body was already preparing the movement before their mind chose it. In other words, you don't choose to act, you act, then you believe you chose. That tiny delay, less than half a second, shakes the very foundation of free will, because if your brain has already made the decision before you feel like you made it, then what is this you that thinks it's in charge? The conscious self may just be a storyteller, arriving late to its own decisions. This has only gotten worse with more advanced neuroimaging. In some cases, researchers can predict your decision up to 10 seconds before you become aware of it. By watching blood flow patterns in the brain, they can determine which button you'll press, even while you still feel undecided. Free will begins to look like a post-it note. Your brain slaps on a completed task. I did this becomes I meant to do this. And eventually, I chose this. But how different is that from watching yourself in third person? This isn't just abstract neuroscience. It happens in your daily life. You reach for the chips before realizing you're hungry. You interrupt someone before noticing you're angry. You say yes to something and then justify it later with a reason you didn't feel at the time. Consciousness may not be the captain. It may be the PR department, spinning stories to explain decisions already made in the hidden machinery of the brain. If that's true, then the self, the one you think is doing the thinking, isn't a driver. It's a witness. And the real choices, they happened before you even knew there was a question. Marx's ideology. Your thoughts are tools for the ruling class. You believe in hard work, in fairness, in law and order, in success being earned. But what if those beliefs aren't really yours? Karl Marx didn't just critique capitalism's economics. He tore into its ideology, the invisible web of ideas that justify an unfair world while making you think it's fair. To Marx, ideology is what makes exploitation feel like common sense. Take the classic story, a billionaire and a beggar. One has 10 houses, private jets, offshore accounts. The other is sleeping under a bridge, and we're told this is natural because the billionaire worked hard, as if the man under the bridge didn't try, as if circumstances, inheritance, and rigged systems don't exist. Marx would say, that's ideology doing its job. It turns inequality into virtue. It turns suffering into personal failure. It hides the machinery of power behind comforting myths. Think of religion. Marx called it the opium of the people. Not because he hated spirituality, but because religion often teaches the poor to accept their suffering as noble, to wait for rewards in the next life, and to obey the hierarchy as if it were divine. It's control disguised as comfort. Or take the idea of the free market. In theory, anyone can compete. In practice, workers sell their labor while the owners own the results. But we're told this is freedom. Marx called it wage slavery, a system where the worker is free in name only, forced to sell their time to survive. Even your morality, your patriotism, your taste in music can be shaped by systems that want you obedient, consuming, and quiet. That's ideology's true horror. It doesn't require lies. It just needs you to forget to ask who benefits. The system doesn't break you with violence. It convinces you that your chains are choices. You think you're free because you chose your job, your clothes, your political opinion. But Marx would whisper, did you really choose? Or were those choices preloaded into your class, your culture, your conditions? Ideology isn't just in your TV shows or your school books. It's in your instincts. It's in the way you explain your own pain. And the ruling class doesn't need to censor you. They've already trained you to censor yourself. Hobbes Leviathan, give up freedom or die. Imagine waking up in a world with no government, no police, no courts, just people, hungry, scared, armed. Do you think humans would come together in peace? Or would they tear each other apart? Thomas Hobbes believed he knew the answer. In his 1651 book, Leviathan, he described what he called the state of nature, a hypothetical world without authority. No kings, no laws, no social contracts, just raw, desperate humanity. And it was hell. In Hobbes' words, life in this state would be solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. You'd sleep with one eye open. Trust no one. Every man a potential murderer. Every neighbor a threat. There'd be no art, no science, no industry. Why? Because none of it matters when you're trying not to get stabbed in your sleep. To escape this nightmare, Hobbes proposed a horrifying solution, the Leviathan, a monstrous, absolute ruler, a sovereign so powerful that no one would dare defy him. You give up your right to fight, to rebel, even to speak freely, and in exchange, you get peace. Sound extreme? That's the point. For Hobbes, freedom wasn't sacred, it was dangerous. Left unchecked, your freedom would lead to chaos, and chaos to death. So better to surrender it to a king, a parliament, or a dictator than die by the knife of your neighbor. This wasn't a theoretical game. Hobbes lived through the English Civil War, saw cities burn and heads roll. He saw what humans become when the social fabric collapses. His solution wasn't ideal, it was necessary. But here's the disturbing part. Once the Leviathan exists, there's no going back. You don't get to opt out. You don't get to demand better rights. The very act of questioning power becomes a threat to peace and so must be silenced. In Hobbes' world, obedience is safety. Rebellion is suicide. Today, we still wrestle with this dilemma. How much freedom should we give up for security? Cameras on every street, data harvested from every device, laws passed in the name of safety, and always the same question: do you want to be free, or do you want to survive? Hobbes would grin at your hesitation. Because in his world, if you hesitate, you're already dead. Rousseau's noble savage, civilization corrupts. Picture a man alone in the forest, no ruler above him, no laws around him, no money in his pocket, no mirror to see himself with. He eats when he's hungry, sleeps when he's tired, fights only when he must. He doesn't compare himself to others. He doesn't own anything. He doesn't even know what it means to be ashamed. To Jean-Jacques Rousseau, this was the natural man, and he was good. Now imagine that man dragged into a city. He's taught to cover his body, to measure his worth in coins, to chase approval with polished shoes and hollow flattery. He learned shame, pride, envy, cruelty, all the things he never knew before. Rousseau argued that this wasn't progress, it was collapse. In his discourse on the origin of inequality, Rousseau makes a bold claim: we were better before civilization. Agriculture. It created property. It created theft. Laws. They were written by the powerful to protect their hordes. Education. A system to train obedience. Politeness. Just another mask to hide manipulation. Everything that made humans civilized made them fake. He called the original state of man amour de soi, a simple self-love based on survival. But civilization introduced amour propre, a twisted, comparative self-worth. Now you only feel good if others feel worse. Social games replaced real needs. Vanity replaced virtue. You don't help others because you care. You help them because you want to be seen helping them. Think of a child performing for likes. A politician kissing babies for cameras. A worker smiling through exhaustion for customer reviews. This isn't kindness, it's performance. Rousseau would call it corruption. The most disturbing part: once corrupted, we can't go back. The savage doesn't know he's pure, but the civilized man knows he's hollow and still keeps smiling. We've built cities where we wear masks as if they're skin. We've created systems that praise the cruel and mock the humble. The very act of returning to nature becomes a luxury for the rich, glamping in curated forests, drinking bottled water while tweeting about minimalism. Rousseau wasn't anti-society. He was warning us: we've confused comfort with goodness, applause with truth, civilization with progress, and in doing so, we may have polished the cage, but we're still trapped inside. Structuralism. Language speaks you. You don't speak it. You probably think in words. Even your silent thoughts likely narrate themselves in your native tongue. But what if you're not the one using language? What if language is using you? That's the idea behind structuralism. In the early 20th century, Swiss linguist Ferdinand de Saussure cracked open the illusion that words naturally reflect reality. He argued that language doesn't just label things, it constructs them. The word tree isn't connected to the tall plant by any cosmic link. It's just a series of sounds we agreed on. And more importantly, it only makes sense because it's not rock, not chair, not cat. Words don't have meaning on their own. They have meaning by their position in a system. But once you live inside that system, it shapes how you think. Here's a disturbing consequence. If your language has no word for something, you struggle to even perceive it. In one indigenous language of Brazil, Pirahan, there's no concept of exact numbers. They don't count. Not because they're unintelligent, but because their language never structured counting as meaningful, and so they live without the mental frame we all assume is natural. Structuralism says it's not just numbers, it's gender, identity, morality. You don't think outside language. You can't. Even your deepest thoughts are trapped in this symbolic prison. Claude Lévi-Strauss took this further in anthropology. He showed how myths across distant cultures shared hidden structures, binary oppositions like good-evil, life-death, man-woman. The content changed. The structure didn't. It's as if humans must think in pairs, in opposites, in contrast. Not because the world is that way, but because language makes it that way. So what happens when the structure limits you? When you try to describe non-binary gender in a two-gender language, when you feel something beyond love or hate, but have no words for it, you're not just frustrated, you're invisible. Structuralism whispers a dark truth. You are not the author of your thoughts. You're a sentence being written by rules you never chose. Your freedom, your originality, even your sense of self, all scripted, formatted, and spell-checked by a system older than you, indifferent to you, and invisible unless you dare to read between the lines. Social constructivism, gender, race, morality, all invented. What if your most sacred truths, your gender, your race, your sense of right and wrong, were nothing more than social habits? Not lies, exactly, but not real either. Social constructivism doesn't say these things are imaginary. It says they are fabricated, enforced through rituals, expectations, and repetition until they feel real. Take gender. You're born with a body, but the moment someone says it's a boy or it's a girl, a script is handed to you. Blue or pink, assertive or gentle, football or ballet. None of these are inevitable. In some Native American tribes, like the Navajo, the concept of two-spirit describes people who don't fit binary gender roles. In Samoa, the Fa'afafine are recognized as a third gender and widely accepted. Gender, then, is not biology. It's theater. A role learned so young it becomes second nature. Race is just as slippery. In Brazil, someone might be called white, brown, or black, depending on lighting, clothes, even wealth. Racial categories shift not with DNA, but with politics. In the United States, the one-drop rule once defined anyone with any black ancestry as black, a legal construct to preserve segregation. That rule doesn't follow science, it follows power. And morality, consider honor killings. In some cultures, punishing a family member, even killing them for bringing shame, is considered a moral duty. In others, it's a horrific crime. Both sides think they're right, because their moral compasses aren't wired into the soul. They're calibrated by culture, enforced by approval and punishment. Social constructs are like invisible walls. You never signed the blueprint, you just woke up inside them. Try to leave, and society responds, sometimes with confusion, sometimes with violence. That's the true power of a construct. It makes the artificial feel natural. So next time you say that's just how it is, pause. Whose version of reality are you reciting? Who benefits from you believing it? And what might happen, terrifying as it is, if you stopped playing your assigned role? Derrida's deconstruction, no stable truth, just endless contradictions. Imagine opening a dictionary to define the word truth, only to find it described using more words, accuracy, fact, reality. So you look those up too. Each one just leads to more words. Eventually you realize the whole thing is a self-referential loop. There is no foundation, just a web. That's the unsettling core of Jacques Derrida's deconstruction, not destruction, but a method of peeling back layers of meaning to expose instability. Language, he argued, isn't a transparent window to truth. It's a house of mirrors. Every word depends on other words, which depend on still more. We never touch reality directly. We only touch signs, slippery, shifting signs. Take the phrase, "justice must be served." Sounds noble, but ask 10 people what justice means, and you'll get 10 different answers. Retribution? Rehabilitation? Deterrence? Forgiveness? Now look closer. Who gets to define justice? Who is served? Who is left out? Deconstruction doesn't destroy meaning. It reveals its fractures, its silences, its hidden assumptions. In apartheid South Africa, the government called racial segregation separate development. Harmless words, neutral sounding, but they concealed violence. That's the power of language. It doesn't just reflect the world. It shapes what we're allowed to see. Derrida pointed to how even the most basic binaries, male-female, reason-emotion, presence-absence, aren't natural opposites. One side is always privileged, the other devalued. Man is seen as default, woman as derivative. These hierarchies hide inside our everyday speech, like traps laid centuries ago. Even the idea of an original fixed meaning is a myth. Texts contradict themselves. Authors can't control interpretation, and readers bring their own baggage. There is no final answer waiting under the surface, only layers of difference, delay, and uncertainty. Derrida called this difference, a pun that means both difference and deferral. You don't escape the maze of meaning by finding the exit. You escape it by realizing there is no outside, just more text, more signs. And yet that doesn't mean nothing matters. It means we must read carefully, speak responsibly, and always, always listen for the voice that wasn't allowed to speak. Identity as performativity. Butler, gender is something you do, not are. You're told you're a woman or a man. But when did that become true? Was it when your body was named? When you dressed a certain way? Or when you acted how others expected? Judith Butler argues, none of those things reveal identity, they perform it. In her theory of gender performativity, Butler claims that identity isn't something we are, it's something we do, over and over, until it becomes invisible. There is no essential womanness or manness beneath the surface. What we call gender is just a repeated script, a performance rehearsed so many times that we mistake the act for an essence. Think of a drag queen. The exaggerated gestures, makeup, voice, it feels like parody, but that's the point. It exposes how even normal gender is itself an act. The high heels worn by executives, the calm tone expected of real men, the way girls are praised for silence, all of it rehearsed, enforced, copied. Butler draws on Simone de Beauvoir's insight. One is not born, but rather becomes a woman, that becoming is not a natural unfolding. It's a social ritual, from baby showers to bridal veils. The world trains bodies into roles, not with freedom, but through pressure. In 1950s America, women were pathologized for rejecting domesticity. In 1930s Germany, men who didn't conform to a masculine ideal were imprisoned. In both cases, the state didn't just punish behavior, it punished failure to perform an identity. And this performance isn't optional. Society polices gender through everything: bathrooms, clothing stores, job applications, pronouns. The stage is everywhere, and stepping out of character can cost you your safety, your job, or your life. Butler's theory isn't just about gender. It's a disturbing look at how all identity might be a kind of theater. Race, class, sexuality. They aren't fixed truths inside us. They're roles we're forced to embody by constant repetition under threat of correction. So when someone says, "Just be yourself," you might ask, which self? The one I was assigned? The one I performed to survive? Or the one that doesn't yet exist because I haven't dared to invent it? In Butler's world, Identity isn't discovered. It's fabricated, enforced, and maybe, just maybe, escaped. Authenticity is a lie. Adorno. You were marketed your selfhood. You've been told to be yourself, to follow your heart, to live authentically. But what if even that voice in your head, the one that whispers this is the real me, has already been sold to you? Theodor Adorno didn't buy the dream of authenticity. For him, it was just another product of the culture industry, a slick illusion designed to keep you docile while thinking you're free. The tragic irony: the more you try to be yourself, the more you fit the mold handed to you by mass culture. Think about it. The rebellious teenager buys a leather jacket because it feels anti-establishment, but that same jacket is stocked by a dozen fashion chains. The spiritual seeker flees capitalism and attends a $2,000 mindfulness retreat. Even your favorite playlist, the one you say really represents you, was generated by an algorithm that knows you better than you know yourself. Adorno called this pseudo-individuality, a form of false uniqueness manufactured for mass consumption. In a truly free world, individuality might be real. But in a system where every desire is shaped by media, every opinion is echoing back from the feed, and every act of rebellion is already monetized, what's left? He argued that capitalist societies turn people into interchangeable parts of a giant machine. The job interview asks about your passion, your values, but only if they fit the role. The dating app wants your quirks, but only if they match the algorithm's preferences. Even your trauma, your politics, your sense of humor, they all become filters for how well you can be sold or marketed. Adorno was writing in the 1940s, but he saw the future clearly. He knew the smiling freedom of consumer culture was a disguise. He watched as radio, television, and Hollywood shaped public consciousness, not through violence, but repetition, not through command, but seduction. His message was bleak: authenticity in this world isn't found, it's fabricated. You didn't create your taste. You inherited it. You didn't discover yourself. You assembled yourself from branded parts. So what does freedom look like? For Adorno, maybe it begins with discomfort, with refusing to accept the roles we've been given, even if there's no easy way out. Maybe the most authentic thing you can do is to admit that authenticity, as you know it, is a lie. And in that moment of recognition, not freedom, but a crack in the illusion, you might finally begin to think. The simulation argument: you are likely digital. It starts with a hauntingly simple question. What if you're not real? Not in the poetic sense, but in the literal, silicon-based, processor-dependent kind of way. In 2003, philosopher Nick Bostrom made a wager with reality. He proposed a now-famous trilemma. One of three things must be true. First, advanced civilizations never reach a point where they can simulate conscious beings. Second, even if they do, they choose not to. Or third, and here's the part that cracks the world, they do simulate minds, and we are probably one of them. Why? Because the simulated would vastly outnumber the real. Think about it. If future civilizations can run ancestor simulations, detailed virtual realities with conscious minds, even one such civilization could create billions of simulations, like high-resolution history games where entire societies play out, unaware. If that's possible, then statistically, the odds that you are in the original physical world drop to near zero. And it's not just armchair theory. Elon Musk has echoed it. Physicists like Neil deGrasse Tyson have considered it. It's entered serious philosophical journals and dinner table memes alike. But here's where it gets disturbing. If you're in a simulation, someone built the rules. Every law of physics, every death, every dream, programmed, pain might be intentional. Free will might be a subroutine. And worse, someone might be watching. In ancient Gnosticism, the idea existed too, that we live in a false world created by a lower god, a kind of demiurge. They didn't have GPUs or quantum computing, but they knew what it felt like to doubt the fabric of the real. The simulation hypothesis is just a modern echo of an ancient fear. What if the world isn't the ultimate layer? And the moral stakes shift too. If you knew you were simulated, would it change how you love, how you suffer? Would cruelty matter less or more? Some argue it makes existence tragic. Others say it makes it beautiful, because even if you're simulated, your experiences still feel real. Pain still hurts. Joy still radiates. The illusion, if it is one, works. So maybe the deeper horror isn't being fake. It's not knowing and living every day as if you are. Berkeley's idealism. Reality is just perception. Close your eyes. Everything vanishes. Your room, your hands, the floor beneath you. Now open them again. What brought it all back? According to George Berkeley, the answer isn't light or matter or energy. It's you. More specifically, your mind. Because in his radical 18th century theory of immaterialism, there is no such thing as matter, not really. Objects exist only as perceptions, and the moment no one perceives them, they vanish. The world is not a thing outside of you. It is a thing within your awareness. If that sounds absurd, imagine this. A tree falls in a forest. No one hears it, sees it, or senses it. Does it exist? Berkeley would say no. Not because it's quiet, but because to be is to be perceived. SAAC, percipi. Now you might laugh. What about when I walk out of the room? Surely the table still exists behind me. But Berkeley's reply was that God, an infinite perceiving mind, maintains all reality. The table doesn't persist because it's made of atoms. It persists because it's being continuously perceived by an omnipresent consciousness. This wasn't just spiritualism disguised as philosophy. Berkeley was attacking the very foundations of materialist science. He believed that matter was a useless assumption, an invisible something no one could directly observe. Why assume an independent world when all we ever have are ideas in the mind? And this wasn't just theory, it drove people mad. Samuel Johnson famously tried to refute Berkeley by kicking a rock and shouting, "I refute him thus," as if foot pain were a philosophical argument. But the truth was harder to dismiss. Modern physics hasn't helped. Quantum mechanics shows that particles don't have definite positions until observed. Schrödinger's cat is both alive and dead until someone opens the box. In other words, maybe the universe really does depend on perception. But Berkeley's view is more disturbing than quantum fuzziness. If he's right, then the world isn't really there until someone or something looks. That means reality is fragile, not just physically, but ontologically. A glitch in consciousness and the world evaporates. Your life, your body, your home, none of them exist outside the mind. Not yours, not theirs, not anyone's. Unless something is watching, always watching. Skepticism. You can't know anything for sure. You've probably heard the phrase, "I think, therefore I am." But have you ever wondered how much further doubt can go? What if everything you believe about the world, about others, about yourself, is built on assumptions that could be wrong? That's the core of philosophical skepticism. Not just healthy doubt, but the terrifying possibility that certainty itself may be impossible. Let's start with a simple example. You see a tree. You're sure it's there. But how do you know? Your eyes could be lying. Your brain could be misfiring. Maybe it's a hologram. Maybe you're dreaming. René Descartes tried to find something that couldn't be doubted, and all he could land on was the act of doubting itself. I think, therefore I am. Beyond that, he admitted, we can't be sure of anything. Now take it one level deeper. In ancient Greece, the skeptic philosopher Pyrrho reportedly lived by radical doubt. He believed that if you couldn't be certain of something, you shouldn't believe it at all. There are stories of him nearly walking off cliffs or into carts because he doubted even what his senses told him. Modern skeptics aren't quite that extreme, but they raise troubling points. How do you know the past happened? Memory, easily falsified. How do you know the future will resemble the past? That's just an assumption. Even science, built on empirical evidence, depends on the idea that observation reflects reality, but all observation is filtered through flawed human senses. And what about reason? Can we trust logic itself? Philosophers like David Hume argued that much of what we believe is not rational, but habitual. We think fire will burn us because it always has, not because we know it must. Skepticism doesn't say, "You're wrong." It says, "You might be wrong, and you'll never be sure." This doesn't mean you should stop living, but it forces a shift. Instead of clinging to certainty, you begin to live in a fog of probability. You learn to function despite the absence of guarantees. And in that fog, something changes. Arrogance evaporates, dogma crumbles, and you realize how fragile belief really is. You can't escape the human condition. But the skeptic whispers, maybe you never really knew where you were to begin with. The brain in a vat, you might already be deluded. You're sitting there, maybe holding a warm drink, maybe checking the time. And yet, how can you be sure any of this is real? Now imagine this. Your brain is not inside your body. It's in a vat, floating in nutrient fluid. Electrodes are attached to it, feeding it all the signals you'd normally get from your senses. When you see a chair, it's just electrical impulses mimicking vision. When you hear a voice, it's a signal tricking your auditory cortex. There is no room, no world, just wires, chemicals, and a tricked brain. This is the modernized version of Descartes' evil demon scenario, a thought experiment that asks whether you can ever know you're not being deceived. Except now, instead of a demon, it's technology. Let's walk through the logic. Every experience you've ever had, touch, taste, pain, joy, love, is mediated by your brain. You don't feel things directly. You feel your brain's interpretation. So, if we could simulate those signals with perfect accuracy, your brain wouldn't know the difference. It would believe you're walking through a park when you're actually trapped in a lab. This idea isn't just philosophical speculation. It's the basis for countless stories, The Matrix, Total Recall, Inception. But it's also used in real neuroscience discussions. If we can manipulate brain inputs, how do we know it's not already happening? Here's the disturbing twist. You have no way to disprove the brain in a vat theory. Any test you come up with would happen inside the simulation. The entire logic system you're using could be part of the lie. Some thinkers argue that if there's no difference between simulated experience and real experience, then the distinction doesn't matter. But that's a comforting dodge, because if your world can be fabricated, then so can yourself, your memories, your beliefs, even your identity could all be artifacts of a machine's script. In 1981, philosopher Hilary Putnam challenged the brain in a vat scenario by saying language itself would collapse in such a case. We wouldn't mean anything real by our words, but that doesn't save us. It only makes the problem stranger. If we're deluded, even the concept of delusion might be an illusion. So here's the existential core. Your certainty in reality is built on faith. Faith in your senses. Faith in your mind. Faith that you're not already a prisoner to fiction. You may think this thought experiment is absurd, but the very fact that you can't disprove it means the prison door has no handle from the inside. Meaninglessness. Even truth might be empty noise. Picture a medieval scribe, hunched over parchment in a monastery, copying what he believes are the words of divine truth. His candle flickers, his ink dries. He doesn't question the words, he preserves them, perfect and unquestioned. But now imagine, hundreds of years later, someone finds that scroll and discovers it was copied from a joke manuscript. A satire. A misunderstanding. This is the terror of meaninglessness, that everything we believe to be true, important, or sacred might be a byproduct of noise. A misread signal. A cultural accident that solidified into dogma. Philosopher Richard Rorty famously said that truth is not about correspondence with reality, but about what your peers will let you get away with saying. That's not relativism for its own sake. It's a recognition that language, consensus, and institutions define what counts as truth. And those things, they shift. They get corrupted. They die. Think about bloodletting. For centuries, it was true that cutting someone open balanced their humors. It killed people. But it was truth, until it wasn't. Truth in practice is historical. Or take the story of Piltdown Man, a hoax fossil of a supposed human ancestor. It fooled experts for decades. Museums printed the diagrams, textbooks taught it. It became a truth until it was revealed as a lie. And then that truth was erased, replaced, rewritten. Now look around. How many of today's truths are built on confirmation bias, economic interest, or technological blind spots? Are we just filtering the chaotic noise of the universe through systems that make us feel safe? Postmodern thinkers like Jean Baudrillard went even further. He said we now live in a world of simulations, of signs that refer to other signs, not to any underlying reality. A celebrity isn't a person but a symbol. A news story isn't an event but a curated narrative. It's not that truth is hard to find. It's that it might no longer exist in the way we think. Even science isn't immune. What gets funded, what gets published, what gets believed, it's all filtered through human interests and institutional power. If every experiment needs interpretation, and every interpretation is shaped by language, culture, and expectation, then what is true? This isn't an argument for despair. It's an argument for humility. For realizing that our truths might be stories we tell ourselves to silence the noise, and if we stop telling them, the silence returns. And it never cared whether we understood. Silence of the universe. You scream into the void, and it doesn't answer. In 1977, NASA launched Voyager 1 into space, carrying a golden record filled with greetings, music, and sounds of Earth. A message in a bottle, tossed into a cosmic ocean so vast that even light takes tens of thousands of years to cross it. But here's the thing. No one has answered, and they probably never will. The silence of the universe is not just a scientific observation, it's a philosophical condition. We live in a world where, no matter how loudly we scream for meaning, guidance, or validation, the cosmos stares back at us with indifference. No signs. No voice, just background radiation. French philosopher Albert Camus called this the absurd, the confrontation between our desperate hunger for meaning and the unresponsive universe. It's like shouting into a canyon that swallows your voice and gives you nothing in return. No echo, just wind. You wake up, go to work, pay bills, love people, lose them, and someday die. And above all of this, there is no cosmic reply, no confirmation that it mattered. The stars don't blink in approval. The galaxies don't record your heartbreak. It wasn't always this way. Ancient humans looked up and saw gods in the sky. They heard thunder and believed it was a voice. The world was enchanted, filled with intentionality. But over time, science explained the storm. The sky became silent. The enchantment faded. Now we have data, but no meaning. In 1961, physicist Enrico Fermi posed the question, where is everybody? If the universe is full of stars, and many of them have planets, and some of those must have life, why hasn't anyone said hello? This is the Fermi paradox. And one of its most chilling implications is that intelligent civilizations either don't last or don't care. And so we're left here talking to ourselves, building telescopes, writing symphonies, creating gods, just to feel like someone is listening. But silence is not absence, it's a wall, a mirror, and when we stare into it, what we find is not the voice of the divine, but our own trembling reflection. It's not just that the universe doesn't speak, it's that it never promised to, and maybe it never could.